Israel is the reason for this war. America does not want to fight this war for Israel.
Let's go. Come on, let's go.
America does not want to send its sons and daughters to war for Israel. Your inability to name that shows your exemptness as leaders. This is wrong. And nobody wants to fight for Israel.
A reminder to all our
Commandant, please stand up as a Marine and stand up for America. No one wants to fight for Israel. His hand. No one wants to fight for Israel.
His hand, his hand. Oh, his hand.
Sir. Let go of your hand. Let go of the door. Let go of the door.
The senator broke his hand. A sitting U.S. senator just broke the hand of a Marine.
Sir.
Control your Senate.
Arm stuck in the door. Okay, sir.
A U.S. senator just broke the hand of a Marine.
Hands stuck.
It starts with a simple question and ends in objective reality. Through our journey from there to here, we find one another and ourselves. And as the next 24 hours breaks free from our last, we gaze onward in reflection of the day.
Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up.
Wednesday, March 4th, 2026. Thank you for tuning in today. Continuing to follow up on the chaos that is what our government is doing to the world. That's a hard clip to watch. I mean, I'd watched that earlier, and I feel like it. The point is that clip is pretty insane where we are today. You're watching for the podcast, especially, you're watching a Marine stand up in front of Congress and simply speak his mind. And because he is not allowed to say that we don't want to fight for Israel, he gets violently dragged out of the room and, of course, has his arm broken as they try to drag him out. I just think it speaks for itself with where we are. I mean, so you're supporting the Marines, you're supporting the troops. It's all about the military. It's all about, neither side of our government cares about what they pretend to care about, in my opinion. And we're seeing that right now. And so it's worth understanding why that clip is so important and why that is not a small sentiment. There's plenty of ridiculous people out there really trying to push claiming that most people support this. You can look at polls. I feel like there's something on my face. That's why I keep doing that. There's plenty of polls out there you can find that will show you, 81% Republicans support this. But of course, like I've always said, polls have value, but they're never the full picture. And if you look, most of the ones we're pointing to are funded by Israeli platforms or platforms we've discussed that are very clearly one-sided, or literally questionnaires handed to Republicans or specific groups of certain Republicans. We'll go over this. The point is that it's objective, that people are not okay with this, guys. That's obvious. If you're seeing major Republicans from Tucker to, you could go down the list of people we've discussed over the years, even people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are standing up and saying this. How can we even argue that this is somehow a, small Democrat conspiracy or whatever they're trying to frame it as? It just shows you how desperate they are. They're flailing. Both sides of the paradigm, in fact. And today there's a very important development around the Kurds, which we were already pointing to. Thanks to Bread and Circus, in fact, you brought that to my attention. And the reality being that this is now not only showing you that this is a regime change war, as it always has been, but that they're continuing to use one of their proxies. Funny how that works out when they're claiming Iran's using proxies all over the world when really they have allies. And if you could prove, which I've never seen, that they are using proxies, Well, how would that be any different than what the US government is doing? And the point being that they have funded these groups a long time ago. And I'm not talking about Iraq. We're going to get into a point about Iraq, but the important reality that you can find your evidence showing that the CIA was funding them and they were doing this and secretly arming them weeks ago, if not much longer, if we understand how this is really going and what the Kurds have always been used for and how many times they've been double crossed by the US government. But that shows you something, doesn't it? So that means that it wasn't a preempt, or rather an imminent attack, which that has already been walked back by some of them anyway, which is insane to me, because then that proves, as Trump says, it was preemptive. It was, are we attacked first? Then there you go. It was not a legal attack. We'll get into it yet again if you missed yesterday's show about the reality of the legalities. There's only three possible options. You can get congressional approval, you can get an authorization, like an authorization for use of military force, or you can act under the War Powers Act, which declares an absolute necessity of an imminent attack, forces or kinetic bombings. That's it. Not even a threat of maybe they might do something tomorrow. That's not the same point, guys. And this has been very clearly outlined. But even my point is that even if that was the case, they just told you, well, we attacked first. So that's not even on the table anymore. They've sailed this down. I mean, I think part of it, I'm not sold on whether or not this is them just floundering, or that this is actually a whole of government effort to drag us into a world where that's the way this stuff operates. There's an important part we're going to get to today, an article well written about, in fact, from Russian media, or rather just a Russian, like a site, it looks like almost like a blogger, like a Substack kind of thing, making an argument about why this is going to drag us into a place in the world that we all see coming, that we don't want to be in. We're going to come to quick points to start about Epstein, which you won't be surprised to find out that the DOJ is like not even quietly been removing more Epstein files while this has been happening. We saw that while we were looking straight at it, and now they've continued to do it even more. This shows you where we are. And on top of that, more allegations about Donald Trump trying to manipulate Massey into stopping from doing what he's doing, or at least that it was happening before we got here. We heard allegations of Kash Patel threatening him about the same point. How do we ignore all of this stuff? I mean, the reality of what that shows you, with Lebanon being attacked, by the way, and that's continuing. So too is all the rest, but I'm going to include that today so we don't miss. This is not a focal point in only one direction. We're gonna rehash, but just not even close to as much as yesterday. But it's really important as this conversation evolves to make sure we understand the legalities around what's going on. And as I just said, how what they're claiming already shows you that they're breaking the law. And how important it is, the eminent argument, how they're now telling you, as Tom Cotton stupidly argued, it's been an eminent threat for 47 years. Honestly, that to me is just because how else do you, because they know it has to be eminent to meet that demand. That's the whole point. But oops, Donald Trump already said it wasn't. Okay, so now you have to find a way to stupidly mold that into whatever makes it, and it's not about even meeting legal justification, because I doubt this will ever go before court. It's about convincing the public. At least enough of them that can scream loud enough. And so that's a talking point. Well, it's been eminent for 47 years. Who cares if the word eminent has a very specific definition that's not met by that claim? But we'll, of course, continue to talk about how they're all lying and contradicting each other about Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, Donald Trump. And the Kurd part of this goes a lot deeper than you think. And that's going to be a section right in the middle about where this continues to evolve around like the global proxy element that really is what the US and Israel have been doing our entire lives. And guess what? The two chief ones among them, ISIS and Al-Qaeda. I know that still seems to shock some people, but guys, you quite literally prove this. And I've done this 1,000 times on this show. You could point to documentaries like James Corbett or Ben Swan or plenty of others that have absolute documented, nailed to the wall evidence. And most people know this already. And all we're really arguing with are people that don't care about the truth and just want to shout down things for their team. That's where I think most of this has gotten to. And the evolution of this, we're going to make a point in regard to the changing of the international order. We're going to talk about the authorization for use of military force, Iraq, 2002, and how this plays a factor in this conversation today on how, the Iraq, well, also because Iraq is part of this right now, because of the elements that are related to Iran, PMU, for example, or the idea of what they're doing in Iraq, and the idea of how this went down under George Bush and how it relates to where we are today. It's striking and how very clear it is. And then the repealing of that act with the National Defense Authorization Act of 2026, and what that includes. Basically removes the justification for how they've done this in the past for going after Iran or Iran proxies in Iraq. But you see, what's going to change, in my opinion, is that they're going to evolve the way that they don't need that justification anymore. It's just because Trump says, or whatever they try to mold this into. But it's interesting that happened, and we'll get into whether that was by design or not. I do think that's very relevant today. and more updates around the general point of, the allegations straight from Moose, the different points around all of that, the bombings on both sides of the conversation, to what degree, what we can prove, and just kind of going through all of this. And again, the IAEA and the different allegations they're spinning. I mean, there's people are spiraling because not even their own team are taking their arguments at this point. And I mean, for literally asking Grok one of their own things that will say they're lying, or looking directly from the source material from the UN, the IAEA, and what they're saying. Either way you look at it, they're going, that's just not true. And somehow these people still get, the same people we always talk about, keep lying and keep getting reach and continue to share. And it's all about keeping a certain frame in a certain group. I think the idea of a majority support has long since gone away. That's my opinion. But plenty more we're going to get into in general. The school bombing, which I didn't make immediately at the beginning of the show because I think it was already very clear from the beginning. But what happened, you'll find very revealing. And this is about Hegseth in a briefing, basically showing the map of where they bombed, and a journalist simply going, well, look here after the fact. On the map, here's the dot where that school is, and it just happens to be right in an area where they just told you they bombed. So even if you want to pretend it was an accident, fine, they're incompetent. They're still responsible. And plenty more we're going to get to today. So let's start with a shout out to or just an acknowledgement of the clip here. This is the clip we were sharing first. This is former Marine Sergeant Brian McGinnis. Stood up in Congress to say that we don't want to fight a war with Iran for Israel while being removed with Capitol Police. And you're going to see more of this. You're going to see more and more and more of these kind of actions where you have, I don't know, and I'm not hoping for this, especially not what I'm about to say, but people who light themselves on fire to make a point, because this is how extreme and crazy this is the point we're at. Some people rationalize why that just might make the difference because there's, in a way, I'm not ever speaking to that kind of action as somehow like clarity of mind. I just think that's a very extreme action. But if you want to be honest about it, that takes a lot of selfless courage to do something like that. And I'm absolutely not advocating for it for anybody, because I think all those people would have been better used to continue to fight the problem. But just think about what it takes to make that decision. And aside from just being a lunatic, which I'm sure exists in that conversation, but people that are consciously deciding that this is so bad and so real that this might just tip the needle to change those people's lives and sacrificing their own. My point is that that's the point, the level it's gone to. And they're having things like this where the people who would otherwise be on an ideological side are just like, all of this is wrong. Where we're going is wrong. We need to speak up. And people are literally standing up in the middle of this and having their arms broken just to make sure you hear that that's what people think. Because if you watch the media, if you watch mainstream alternative, you get an absolutely ridiculous cartoon level of what they want you to think everyone's talking about. And it's just not true. And I mean, like, everything today, everything from how many people support it, from what everybody thinks to what actually happened. I mean, the whole damn thing. Yeah, guys, let's remember, this is the post-truth world. That was what they discussed. The Bilderberg meeting, it's not a joke. It's all very real, obviously documented. And then moment to moment, you watch this develop. You watch them turn this into a situation where the truth is a secondary factor as long as the partisans are talking, which is the entire conversation. Glenn points something out, and I wanted to include this to start because I just thought this was, we mentioned this article, but the way he framed this, and just to think about this going through the conversation. And this is the exact same thing, by the way, from the other side of the game. The COVID-19 illusion, the chaos that there was, really both sides, but primarily the Biden administration showed you that. It's a cult dynamic, or whatever you want to call it. Maybe you don't think that term is, it's too extreme, maybe, but it is that kind of idea. It's an ideological adherence. The truth is secondary for a lot of people in this game. And that's why Trump comes out and says, not after, by the way, Laura Loomer comes out and goes, I showed Tucker everything, or rather, I showed Trump everything you said, Tucker, like she's 8 years old. I mean, how embarrassing. But guess what? Right after she spoke to Trump and apparently just was like, tattletale, Tucker said mean things about you that happened to be true. Donald Trump comes out and goes, Tucker bad, Megyn Kelly bad, because they criticized the Iran action. Like clockwork, man. Think about how crazy it is that person is influencing Trump. That's what I think happened. You can decide. But we've already seen it. Walking down the steps together from Air Force One, that woman is an objectively vile and absurdly stupid person. And here we are. The bottom line, though, is that he said MAGA is Trump, because what they're saying is make America great again is not what you're doing. And his answer is not, I am making America great again. His answer is, that's not the point. It's what I say. You can't make a better example of what Trump is. That encapsulates exactly who he is in every possible way. And maybe you think he's going to do good for the country. Maybe you still think that who cares if he's narcissistic, and most of them are. I'm not even saying you have to, but just acknowledge that's an objectively obvious point. MAGA is Trump is saying that whatever I do is making America great again. That's not the reality. If he does something bad, suddenly that's MAGA, because that's what that would mean. Words have meaning. And he says, as Trump again has said, because it's, I think, the third time he said that, MAGA means nothing more than fealty to whatever Trump believes when he wakes up, even, as we've seen many times, if it's the exact opposite of what he said he believed the day before, then it is, by definition, a cult, not a political movement. That's why Marjorie Taylor Greene, as he argues, has said there's a fundamental difference between MAGA, a cult of personality and leader worship, and America First, which I agree with. And well, in the sense of MAGA meaning the Republican team sports. But if you want to say America First, make America great again, these are all just sentiments, guys. And the people who actually believe in doing that, not just whatever Trump says it is, right? Like Maha, same point. This is why I was adamant about this in the other show, because I believe there are most of the MAGA movement who genuinely want, or just Republicans or conservatives who want this country to be better. And maybe we disagree on what that might even look like. Maybe they have disgusting opinions, in my view. It's different, though, than arguing that they believe that whatever he does is the right path versus what embodying what they want to happen. You see, there's a very big difference there. And at the end of the day, that means if you believe that most people don't care about accomplishing what they wanted, well, that's just, I mean, think about what a crazy reality that is. And maybe that's the case, but I think you can prove that's not true because of the way they act, because of 1,000 different things. So just at least for sake of conversation, accepting that most people genuinely want the things they're being sold, well, then that means that most of them, even if we disagree, because he's not doing what he promised, are unhappy with him. I mean, this is like 2 + 2 = 4, guys. It's obvious. And so here we are, where it's obvious that he's simply so frustrated that he's going, shut up. If you are not my team, then you're not a part of this team anymore. And many of them are going, okay. Now, here is what they're doing in regard to Epstein. And this is a report from what he was doing before, but it just continues to show you how desperate they are. Sinister Trump plot, as the Daily Beast even frames it, to steal GOP rebels' staff revealed. This came out yesterday. The extraordinary lengths President Trump allegedly went, according to Thomas Massey, to keep his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein out of the spotlight, which, I mean, if you can't acknowledge that he dragged his feet and tried to stop it, come on, guys, let's not be children. You can argue that maybe he had a different reason, like straight here, exactly what I said at the beginning, because I'm always giving you objective stances on all sides. Maybe he just thought Democrats would lie about things, or as we've already seen, subjectively claim an email that says something is proof that you did something wrong when it's not. And hypothetically, maybe he didn't break the law. He just was friends with a terrible person. That says a lot. All I'm saying is that that's a valid argument. Even I would go, yeah, that makes sense. I disagree, my opinion. But all they ultimately do is just, this is how it tends to go. It becomes obvious. It's like all of a sudden Trump burns them all in his office and he just goes, well, it's because they were all lies. Well, what is an honest person going to say? Well, that's suspicious. So this is where we are, where he didn't give you that. He just basically tried to drag his feet. Now they all lie about it. And he tried to poach people who worked for Massey to stop that from happening, from coming out. Massey claims key members of his team were offered more prestigious jobs in the Trump administration in an effort to stall legislation that would have forced the Department of Justice to release all documents linked to Jeffrey Epstein. Now, remember, this was the thing they eventually were forced to do anyway, or at least pretend to sign the document, the Epstein Transparency Act. But they were behind the scenes more than once. We'll talk about the cash point too. Were doing everything they could to stop it from even happening. Then it was inevitable, and then so they pretended like it was always what they were going to do. It's just how this goes. Both sides of it, all politics, anywhere in the world. That's what I've come accustomed to. I mean, that's what I've seen, right? I mean, if you're paying attention, that's how this operates. And I don't know if that's the way it has to be. I think this is sort of a by design reality right now where the leading elements are just very shockingly corrupt and disgusting. Maybe that's just how all governments are. That's kind of what I think. But either way, it's created that circumstance. I'd like to see if we could change that. There was a 360-degree pressure campaign, or 360 pressure, that's the same point, meaning all the way around, from the Trump administration to derail his push for a congressional vote. Massey. Most notably, Massey recalled multiple instances in which his staffers were offered administration posts, like major jumps in the line, right? So now all of a sudden you're in the Trump administration, like your career that you just jumped major steps, right? or lucrative private sector roles. Because guess what, guys? It's the same damn thing. That's the revolving door, or basically just the same room at this point. We're talking about, hey, guys, you want to be in the administration of the Trump administration, the political side, or maybe you want to go work for Palantir. Same time, your choice. What does that show you? That's just hilarious to me, or alarming. And it says one employee told The Atlantic he received an offer that would have doubled his salary just weeks before the House was set to vote on releasing the files. Now, as he asked him, Massey said, did it ever occur to you that they might be offering you this job to basically make me less effective? The staffer themselves commented saying, that's what my mom said. Now it says the White House reportedly made similar overtures to the MAGA-aligned women in Congress, who joined Massey, to some degree, some of them, and his Democrat ally, Ro Khanna, in a spearheading of Epstein effort, including former Georgia lawmaker Marjorie Taylor Greene, who seems to have stayed on that line, right? And then they mentioned Nancy Mace, which I completely disagree with. I think she gave a lot of lip service. She stood up and had made some stances that even probably made people uncomfortable, but then clearly she is on the side of the team. That's obvious. Whether it's Iran or Epstein, by the way, because she's towed the line in plenty of examples. Either way. Oh, and then it mentions Lauren Boebert as well. Kind of the same thing for me. The Republican lawmakers broke with the president and met with Jeffrey Epstein's victims throughout the summer and fall. At one point, Boebert was summoned to the White House Situation Room for a meeting with Pam Bondi, Kash Patel. Well, you know why, guys? While Greene had a public falling out with the president. Now, see, my point is, after that meeting, they all went back into the... Marjorie Taylor Greene didn't. I'm not saying support her. I'm not saying trust her. I'm just saying that's an obvious reality that she, instead of falling back in line, didn't. Boebert, the rest, did. They had a little come to Jesus meeting. Hey, come meet us and let us tell you why you need to get back in line. Whatever that did, whatever it was. Still, perhaps no one bore the brunt of Trump's ire more than Massey, whom the president has repeatedly labeled a loser, a moron. Trump is now backing Massey, very intelligent, well-descripted, accurate. It's like, what does that mean? What is he losing at? What is he dumb about? Those are just pejorative. That's just to make, I hate that person. You should hate him too. It's based on childish, petty things, which anybody can see. In fact, the reality is Massey is far more adherent to the actual America First mindset than anybody else I can see. Trump is now backing Massey's primary challenger because that's not obvious and almost like manipulative. I mean, I don't even know. There's got to be some kind of a violation in there where you have the sitting president funding campaign challengers to somebody in Congress. I actually don't know if that's a crime, but please, somebody do some due diligence on that. I should have done it earlier. How in the world would that not be some kind of a violation, a conflict of interest, a crime? I don't know. Please, seriously, somebody look into that and let me know in the chat if you guys find out. And now it says, if the country's savable, this is what Massey said. If the country's savable, I'll win my reelection. And if it's not, I don't need to be there. Interesting. Now, just to be very objective and, conspiratorial, if you will. First of all, it's a binary, and it could be there may be other things that could mean, right? Just to be objective. But at the same time, I kind of agree with what he's saying. If Massey is genuine, and so far he seems to be doing very consistent and standing by his principles, and I agree with that. I'll support it. Not in the voting sense, especially not right now, but I definitely will support what he's doing. And it says, if the country is savable, I'll win my reelection, right? So you could argue, well, I guess what I was going to say is that ultimately it would make sense if he was genuine, right? But I could see a world in which, sort of like the whole America Party or Green and what she might do, where you could set this up to where he won't win because AIPAC and whatever else is just bombing this whole thing. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Republicans or people don't support him, because I don't believe our elections are even necessarily legitimate today. And what that would look like was then Massey would not go back to Congress because he feels this is all broken and then runs for president. And that would go, oh my God, he's going to change everything. Well, and maybe he would, but I'm very skeptical about how that always seems to be how this kind of goes. And then it ends up being somebody who sort of brings you back into line. I mean, I've seen this so many times over the years, even smaller versions of it like a Gabbard or others. I mean, this always happens. Bernie Sanders. So just think about that. And I'm only saying that to be objective. I genuinely right now, with how long he's been doing that, I feel positive about where he seems to be aiming. Because look at how many people he's irritating and upsetting. But as always, that very well could just be the thing they do to get you to think he's the next candidate, right? But it's interesting he said that. So we'll have to wait and see. For now, the congressman remains laser focused on Trump's relationship with America's most notorious pedophile. While Trump begrudgingly signed Massey and Khanna's Epstein Files Transparency Act into law last year, 3 million documents happen to still be withheld. And they've been very clear that no more is coming. That's just a straight up crime, by the way. And it's also the reality that double crossing their own people. Now it says, and this is what he posted, and I already showed you this on the first PSA, bombing a country on the other side of the globe won't make the Epstein files go away any more than the Dow going above 50,000 will. And I guarantee if he continues to be consistent that he'll follow up with this and he'll call them out on the reality that Epstein Transparency Act did not allow them to just stop or to withhold the conversations between Bondi and Kash Patel, for example, or any number of things that they have been caught doing, least of which, or I guess you should say least of which, in addition to, is them continuing to delete files as we speak. Many of Trump's I just stopped following the numbers because I think it's already clear. It was going down every day. I checked Trump's name every day. So, and here was the clip that I shared this in the past. This is Massey telling you that Kash Patel, before this, was threatening people in his team and to him saying, if you don't play ball, and I'll let him speak for himself. And this is all about the Epstein files as far as I can tell.
Also, I'm going to say this here on camera because it's important. One of Kash Patel's staff threatened my staff with a criminal investigation if we didn't straighten up and play ball.
I was going to ask you about that, but since you brought it up, and I didn't
I'm bringing it up.
Okay, you brought it up.
And so, like a criminal investigation having nothing to do, he said it was going to be a fraud. We're going to investigate one of your staff for fraud. Right. And he told.
And think how funny that is too, right? Whatever one, we'll pick one, right? But the point is, we'll accuse one of them of fraud if you don't do what you're told. That's corruption, obviously.
Another one of my staff, if you guys don't straighten up, if you want to play hardball, if this is how you want to play it or something like that, this member of your staff is going to get criminally investigated for fraud. A very specific threat.
Speaks volumes, and especially with the new reporting, doesn't it? I don't know how much people can ignore. And as always, my opinion is we're past that line already. And I mean from partisans as well. Now, here's the CBS News. The DOJ has been taking down Epstein files. Here's what remains if you want to look into it. All of us have been showing that since the very first day, right? And I said, this is important to think about the timing, right? Under cover of the very illegal regime change wars that he swore he'd end, right? So over here, he's removing information from the Epstein files, which was something he promised that he wouldn't do, or rather he would release everything. Most transparent in history, right? What a joke. And then instead of, you'd think that if you're doing the thing you don't want them to see, how are you going to cover it with the other thing you don't want them to see? That's because I don't think they have a choice right now, guys. He's covering this crime of removing Epstein files with the crime of bombing a country he told them he'd never bomb, and the regime changing one he told them he'd never do anymore. And it says, I wrote, that's desperation, ladies and gentlemen. They're drowning in it. And those trying to convince you to ignore the reality of it all might as well be violent players on the sinking Titanic. Meaning both two things, right? Just the inevitable and just distraction, right? Just don't think about what's happening. This is fine meme. That's the whole point. Now, quickly on Lebanon, because this needs mentioning. It gets so little attention because there's so much going on. During Gaza's genocide, this was happening simultaneously. And the reality is, because it's been going on even longer in regard to the ceasefire, follow Craig Murray's work and plenty of others, I forget the number. It was something like thousands of times. They'd violated the ceasefire in Lebanon. They made an agreement a while back, and they've never really done much about it. Israel's bombing here and there, doing it at once, encroaching, taking more territory. No one says a word. Not really. And so right now, after this started, Israel has just kicked off every possible angle because this is what it's always been about. I mean, didn't we all tell you this, that we're honest? This was always the greater Israel expansion, colonialism, and here we are. The moment this kicks off, there's things going back. There's actions taking place in Syria. There's actions taking place in Iraq. I'll show you in a minute. There's actions taking place in Lebanon. There's actions taking place in Gaza yet again, in the West Bank. They're just like initiating everything. And here we are. Israel has issued, this has happened before, by the way, and what right do they think they have to initiate an evacuation order for a foreign country? Why? Because that's who they are. They believe they have a right to this. They do not. And by the way, that's not what they'll say in public. We'll be called racist for pointing out the reality of what's happening, even though we're talking about a government committing a crime. How stupid is that? The reality is that they are now telling Lebanese people in the South that they have to move because of what they're about to do, which is illegal. There's no justification for it. There's no declaration of war. It's the same conversation. even from an international level, because it's not the same point for U.S. law in Israel, but the international dynamic is the same. Israel's expecting over 1 million Lebanese people to occupy their land and destroy their homes. Basically moving over 1 million people up to the north in order to take their territory. Where's everybody talking about this? I mean, if this was Iran or anybody, come on, you know the same old the same old cycle, guys. Israel is yet again trying to illegally seize more Lebanese territory, but don't expect the mainstream media or the mainstream alternative media to report that to you. This is all while Israel rains bombs down on civilians in Lebanon, but nothing new there, unfortunately. And here's examples of this. This is posted today. Israel is raining bombs on civilian homes in Tyre, South Lebanon. Right? So think this, guys. They're telling them to move away from the north. At the same moment, they're bombing the place they told them to go. Well, gee, certainly sounds familiar, doesn't it? Seeing as how we've reported that same sentence probably 16 times throughout the Gaza genocide that's still going, because it happened over and over. The very first week, they bombed the crossing from Egypt while they were coming across. It just doesn't stop. And you can prove it all. UN, international groups, everybody's pointing it out, but you get the same lying people in politics. What do you think that means? Why would they lie at such an obvious moment? Because they're compromised. And they are bombing people in a city that has stood for over 4,000 years. Civilian locations, just like in Iran. We'll get there in a minute. Here, the same methods used in Gaza are being deployed in southern Lebanon, again, the place they're being told to move to completely erase any trace of human presence and colonialize new territory. And if you think that's actually a hyperbolic statement, might want to listen to what the Israeli government's openly saying about Lebanon. What Ben Gvir and Smotrich will openly discuss. And that's not some side point. That's not like, oh, Lindsey Graham said a dumb thing. Similar point, because they're not necessarily the leadership, but it's different because those two have, objectively more power collectively than even Netanyahu at this point, outside of maybe from like an acting point of prime minister. And that's been discussed by their media because they have influence over the entire settler movement. And basically he's being held hostage by the most radical parts of that government. That's not to say he's not radical himself. So the reality is that they have made, or the point was that those people are stating, here's what we're taking in Lebanon. Here are the maps of what we're going to take. Here are the names in Hebrew we're going to call those Lebanese territories after we take them. You've got Daniel Weiss out there saying, we're going to build all these settlements, and I've even told Donald Trump. But yet we get gaslit by the same people telling you they're fighting for freedom and human rights. Only hours after reinvading southern Lebanon, Israeli terrorists begin posting their own videos of displacing Lebanese homes. You see how crazy that is? That we get denied that it's happening, but then they go post and laugh about it on TikTok. Everyone's gaslighting us because Israel's dictating so much of what's happening. And if you want to still pretend like I'm talking about Jewish people, you're ridiculous, because I didn't say that, and that's not what the evidence shows outside of the Jewish connection to what Zionism is. We go over this every day. My point in saying that is because we're getting more audience every day. And the reality needs to be clear every time we discuss it, that what we're actually talking about is the Israeli government committing massive crimes. Whether or not they're atheist or Christian or Jewish, which, by the way, many of them are in fact non-secular atheists, sort of like Herzl, the founding element of Israel, of Zionism, or many of the original people who started it. Easy to look up, by the way, but keep telling me it's all about the homeland for the Jewish people. Mohammed Safa, the U.S. and Israel have killed nearly 400 people in Lebanon, and nearly 800 in Iran, with thousands injured in less than 72 hours. But keep telling me about Hezbollah and what they're doing. This is what a real threat to the world peace looks like. Now, this is, I'm used to this, but still this kind of blew me away with where we're at. BBC, after what I just showed you, and plenty more I could include, this is what they post yesterday. Battered and isolated, Hezbollah drags Lebanon into another war. It makes my stomach turn. You understand, like the writer, the editors, everybody around them, they go on. I mean, unless they're also in their inner little bubble, which is probably how this tends to work. The truth, guys, is if you have a brain and eyes, you can see that they've been bombing them relentlessly and invading and occupying. What's Hezbollah doing? I mean, again, same point of Iran. They probably are guilty of plenty of problems. Show me. Prove to me what you claim Hezbollah is doing right now to justify what they're doing. Prove to me what you think they've ever. I mean, it's the same story every time. Battered and isolated. And they write, Hezbollah finally shoots back. That's what's happening. After 15 months of Israel waging a violent one-sided war against them in villages in Lebanon, and this is what the BBC writes. You don't have to trust me or anybody. Check for yourself. Look at Craig Murray's work, who was on the ground in Lebanon, speaking with UN agents, discussing it, demonstrating why they're doing it. The UN says they violated it. Nobody cares. We're in a very, very dangerous point in the world, but I see it coming down, at least the possibility of it, if we do something. Now, I can't believe I actually didn't sketch this when I posted this showed it the other day. Like, I would have loved making fun of this yesterday. But the White House demonstrating yet again, either that they're not actually even of the mind, they're like, don't even understand what they pretend to be fighting for, or what they don't even understand our own history, whatever you think that may mean, you can decide for yourself. They write the revolution that began in 1776. My point the other day was just how ridiculous it was. They're saying this while they're invading a foreign country, or they're, whatever, America first. Well, it didn't begin or end in 1776. In fact, arguably, the movement started in 1765, and the revolution started in 1775, like the actual military engagement. And there's nuance with that too. But to say it began in 1710, that's just because they're citing the year that I don't think they even knew what they were talking about. How alarming is that? And that's first just making fun of them. You didn't start then, you morons. But that's where we are. Almost 3 million views on that post, on his making fun of them. Well, in regard to the government and their absurdities, Carol Leavitt came out and said, if you don't align with the values of the United States and you don't respect our country, as they clearly demand respect, right? Our culture, our laws, and our people, you're not welcome here. Well, yeah, plenty of people agree with that today, especially since that's what they've been pushing on us for a long time. But do we not realize that that's like aggressively anti-American? Like, at least what we pretended we were like moments ago. The melting pot and, welcoming everybody, freedom for all, the freedom of religion and speech and all blah, blah, blah. But if you don't think this, feel this way, or say these things, you're not welcome here. Great. I mean, not even the Democrats said it that ridiculously. I argue they were much more aggressive with their action, though, at least at the moment back then. Now it's just blending all of the, look, right now it's more extreme than I think I've ever seen it. But I argue it would have been the same no matter who was in this position. You can decide for yourself. Right? But if you don't align with what are the values of the United States? Right? I mean, well, objectively, based on like our, the Constitution. Yeah, well, that's Murray's point. Does that include government officials who start wars without declaration of Congress? And that's more of a law, but if we're talking about a value, they're violating these things every single day. They're out there doing countless things that are antithetical to everything that represents this country. But this is what they say because it's just tokens. It's meaningless. It's all flash, no substance. You don't respect our country? You mean, by the way, the government we're talking about, the country is us. The government doesn't deserve your respect. By the way, it never really does. It's an entity that you should be questioning and being critical about because that's the reality of it. But at the end of the day, if they are consistently showing you they have integrity, showing you they have principles, and continue to fight for good things, then you can basically, garner that respect eventually. But the idea that today you're supposed to, despite them breaking the laws and violating human rights and committing genocide, cheering on the worst things I've ever seen in my life, but yeah, you're not welcome here. Well, let's talk about the congressional part of this because I think it's important to reiterate, but some updates as well. We just discussed this yesterday. U.S. officials admit Trump lying about Iran war. They did. The Pentagon, as well as plenty of other officials, came out and said that just making things up. They didn't have justification. There was no imminent threat. And now because that came out, now they're kind of waffling and walking back, acting like that's kind of not what I said, even though here's exactly you saying that. It's just painful, guys. And understanding why this war is illegal. Now, we're going to go through some points to add to basically yesterday's show. And I really recommend you check that out and go through it entirely. I'll add most of it just in a quick point. But it's important to go through the documents like we did yesterday and really understand the War Powers Act and what it really is. And I've criticized that plenty of times over the years and how it's abused and how the openings exist for certain actions and how they don't meet them in any way right now. So the basic reality is there's 3 possible options. If there's, let's just say you want to go to war. In this country, you have to get a congressional approval. And yes, we're not even going to get into the reality of how it hasn't happened since World War II because it's a fair point. I agree, but it doesn't change in any sense why it would or shouldn't happen, should or should not happen today. Like, unless your argument is it hasn't happened since then and that's why it needs to never happen again. Well, then that would make sense. But that's not what's happening. The argument is, well, you didn't care when Obama didn't do it. Okay, I did though, but that's a flailing point. It has no relevance on whether, like, in fact, you saying that suggests that you care about it, right? So why would you not care now? Because what it says is my team. right? I want my team to win, and your team did that, so it's my team. You know, that it's a childish thing. And so the reality is congressional approval it's clearly the reality of the Constitution, and obviously it still exists. Now, there's been measures and things that they've done over the years to water that down, War Powers Act being one of them. But even though you could argue there's a valid point being made within it, with emergency, but again, to make it clear, congressional approval or an authorization for use of military force, like with Iraq. Now, that is we can get into the absurdity of Congress approving that based on the reality of what we were told, but either way, that was a legal action. And so he got the authority. And now there's limits and there's guidance. And of course, who cares going forward? They've used that right up until this year, by the way. The third option is the War Powers Act argument that if there's an imminent threat, that's why they're using the term, an imminent threat. And if you look it up, it's very specific. It doesn't mean tomorrow. It means literally missiles flying or invasion underway, not even saying I'm going to do something to you. Like literally, Ron says, I'm going to bomb everybody tomorrow. That's not the same thing. And this has been roundly discussed for years. And it was discussed back in Iraq. That's why they went to the UN, by the way. That's why they actually sought congressional approval, right? I mean, they're pointing these things, even though it undermines their point. And so where we're at now is they first tried to argue that we were essentially forced to because Israel was going to do something and we had to react. I guess they thought that would justifiably show that they had some kind of a pressure, but that's not legal. Like, doesn't legally justify it. But then it came around where Trump was like, nope, we acted first. And so now they're arguing, well, that wasn't true. And Israel didn't do that. It was sort of like a side part. And at the end of the day, they're now saying it wasn't eminent. Except it's always been eminent for 47 years. Right. So they're playing this game where they're trying to create the narrative that makes sense to fit the legal justification, but it doesn't. Johnson, this was posted today. Iran have declared, they have declared war on us, he says. Now, I believe him saying this is very deliberate. No, they haven't. I'll show you, it's legally the reality. That's never happened. But what he means is simply, and this is what I think anyway, to manipulate people who don't understand the situation. He means pretty much, well, they've been at war with us effectively for all this time. Not really. If you pushed him, probably he would say, no, not technically, but for all this time, they've been bombing us in secret, even by effect, they've been at war. That's what I think they're trying to do. But they know that people who don't know what they're talking about are going to go on saying, well, he said Iran declared war. No, they did not. He says, I don't believe in semantics because we're not at war right now. Like, so he's trying to yet again argue that somehow that this doesn't constitute war, even though it does by every definition of what it's ever been used for. And congressional discussions have already made that clear. And Trump and the rest of them have already called it a war. It's just so dumb. But either way, it's their action first. It doesn't change the reality of it. Here's what he said.
Iran has attacked 3 of our U.S. embassies in the last couple of days. Okay, those are sovereign territories of the U.S. They have.
Yeah, and just so we're clear, we're going to get into the bombing part of this. They are bombing sites, and every single one of them have been shown to be valid targets. And even Tel Aviv, even Netanyahu tried to lie about that, and then John Kiriakou on Piers Morgan admitted, yes, that's a valid target because there is a base underneath that, which you guys already know. And yet they stand up and go, look at what they've done. They're Trump and the rest of them are suggesting that the bombings of which, by the way, by definition are legal because they're responding to the attack, not defense, but they have a legal right to respond under international law. And so by definition, what they're doing is legal unless they, of course, bomb civilian targets. And so he's pointing at those actions going, see, we told you. So basically, look, we told you. They're the only ones that follow the law, apparently. It's baffling me. But that's what desperation will do. I mean, what else are they going to say?
Declared war on us. Of the U.S. They have declared war on us. I don't believe in the semantics. We've talked about the language this morning.
In fact, I think what he just tried to do right there is argue that by bombing those locations is effectively declaring war. Well, that's a fair argument if they had started with that, if that was the first action. But no, you bombed them first with no justification. That was the initiation. That was a response.
We're not at war right now. We're 4 days in to a very specific, clear
that they can't define
mission,
that they haven't given you objectives for, that there's only basic, or rather not, they've given you some objectives, but there's no clear path to achieve them. There's no plan, as even Trump's letter to Congress stated.
Operation Epic Fury, which has 2 components, as you know, that we have articulated over and over. The president has, the Commander of the Joint Chiefs, everybody has explained.
Yeah, you've yelled the narrative over and over. That's not what we're talking about, bud.
Iran has attacked 3 of an operation Epic Fury, which has 2 components, as you know, that we have articulated over and over. The president has, the Commander of Joint Chiefs, everybody has explained.
It's just painful, man. Like, he must know that nobody believes this, not even his own team. And yet they hear and I did want to point this out, by the way, just because it bothers me. Brian Mast is such a manipulative person. I mean, in everything he does, you watch the way he talks. He's just a disgusting person. When he gets engaged with by people, by his own constituents that disagree with his opinions, he treats them like they're garbage. Why in the world does this man wear shorts every single time he goes out anywhere? Think about it. Why? Is it necessary? Can you not just wear pants? You're forcing everybody to engage with that because you constantly want to be seen as that. That is a victim point, or whatever you want to call it. Now, you can have respect for whatever you think he did. That's a different conversation. The reality is how he's milking this in front of everybody while he wears a foreign uniform in our country. That's ridiculous. It's equivalent of somebody having a prosthetic arm and having the coat torn off the arm torn off their coat every day. Make sure you see the arm because I did this in the military. Again, you can respect the action and still make fun of him for constantly. And it also just looks weird. Why are you wearing shorts? Because you want to constantly put that in people's faces. Now, that may be taken wrong by some people. I just think it's the kind of person these people are, the kind of people that they are. They're always trying to constantly, project and use and manipulate everything, while they stand there and bald-faced lie about everything they're doing. Mike comes out and says, Iran's increasing aggression and rapid ballistic missile development presented a clear and imminent threat. Here we are again. So now you're pretending it wasn't technically an imminent threat by any definition we ever used. We're saying that what they've got weapons. So that's clearly an imminent threat because we know how crazy they are. That's not how this gets played, but that's desperate. That's all they can do. But let's be clear. That's been the government of the U.S. has done this before. Trump has done this before. You just drag it forward. No one agrees, but Congress is feckless, so nothing will happen, and it just keeps going. And behind it all, most of them actually want this to happen anyway, I think. So the truth is that ballistic missiles, which every country has a right to, are not a threat to anybody outside of the reality they can always be a threat to anybody. It's not an imminent threat to anything other than, engaging in warfare, and Iran has never done that. Like in this context, they've never bombed the United States in the homeland. They've never initiated those attacks outside of being attacked first. So here we are. Increasing aggression. But aggression has a word, a meaning, right? So building things is not aggression. The aggression is what you claim they might do if and when. I can't think of any other word than just desperate. That's a lazy patchwork. And it says the president acted fully within his authority under the law. No, he did not. That's just bad. But as Daniel McAdams, Iran's increasing aggression. Who are you talking? This is just people's making fun of him. You attack them without provocation. It doesn't matter that you argue this. This is what Bolton tried to do before. And you have to understand, if you actually thought there was an attack, right? That might justify the preemptive attack, that requires congressional approval or authorization. That's the reality. The war powers part of it is only allowed if it's an imminent attack. All he's doing here is trying to mash those two things together. You can't have it both ways. It can't be imminent and also be preemptive. But that's what you're getting from these ridiculous people because that's all they know what to do. And that's what you get this ridiculous person trotted out for. Cotton is just probably, whatever. There's something about him that just rings as what's the right word for it? There's something about him that's just held back. I don't know what it is. Eminent for 47 years. Nothing can be eminent for 47 years, says the fact check on Twitter. But you already know this.
Brian, no, not at all. I thought Secretaries Rubio and Hegseth, Chairman Kaine, and Director Ratcliffe did a very good job of laying out the intelligence and the current state of operations. The simple reality is Iran has a vast missile arsenal.
Like everybody, yeah.
That far exceeds the combined missile defenses of the United States, our Arab friends, and Israel.
Okay. No, so the point is that they have more than us, and that's not fair. Got it.
It gets much worse every single month.
Yeah, it means they make more missiles. So do you. So does the government. So does everybody. You guys have the largest weapons manufacturers in the world. What are we talking about?
That is an unacceptable risk for the United States. It's
an unacceptable risk for them to have weapons that just because it's more than you, apparently. Well, you have to realize there's two things happening here. We're going to get into the reality of their strategic ability right now. and how it seems that Iran just played them like a fiddle. And now they're at a point where they have diminished what they need, and the long game was played well by Iran, and Trump was looking to the next week. This is what it looks like anyway. And so what he's doing here is making that argument. Well, we can't just let them have missiles. Why? Because right now they don't have enough to be able to effectively withstand what they have to offer in the extended time frame we're going to discuss. Even if we're just talking about 8 weeks, by the way, which we're going to get to why they're using those terms. But think about that. How is it justifiable to say they just have more weapons than us? They can outmatch us with what they have. We can't allow that. Well, wait a minute. What about Russia or China or anybody else? Like, so it's all because we can, you understand. You see, why? Because they don't have nuclear weapons, guys. That's the only logical reason here. If that logic makes sense to other countries, then you'd be doing that to every other country because many of them have lots of stuff. But this one is okay because you know that they don't actually have the nukes that would make you resist. Like with North Korea, they stopped when the second they got that. I mean, that's very clear. Their actions continue to show you that they use the claim of this to justify their actions, but their actions only make sense because they know they don't have them. And we'll get into what the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, said, what Tulsi Gabbard recently said.
It's an existential risk for our Arab friends in Israel.
Our Arab friends? What a weirdo. So Israel, they have more weapons and we can't allow that.
And it wouldn't get better if we waited for 6 or 12 or 18 months.
Right. Because I guess that's just more time and they make more weapons, like basic reality of every country building more weapons.
To find a more imminent risk. In fact, Iran has posed an imminent risk to the United States for 47 years as they've maimed and killed thousands of Americans.
Oh, there we are again. Now, so what they always do is that's like thousands all over. No, it was one thing, one field of war and one engagement where you guys were the aggressor and it was illegal. That's why the number never changes, except when Luna or Trump actually thousands, maybe millions. I don't know. He actually said that. How dumb is that? He knows that's not true, but he just wants to broaden it out. Now you're going to get ridiculous people online going millions. They've killed millions. They have not. He's lying, right? The reality of the thousands were killed were because they were illegally invading Iraq, and Soleimani was the one that was defending against that. And on top of the fact that he was the one chiefly fighting ISIS, by the way, especially since we know that they're actually working with them. But their argument has whittled down to basically we can't allow them to have abilities. Like I said, get rid of all the butter knives because they could use those to stab people. It becomes ridiculous. Like if it was nuclear weapons and now it's just missiles. Now I understand, and maybe people don't know that there's agreements about how far certain missiles can go, but I don't believe any of them truly care about these things. And either way, that's not been accurately demonstrated that that's actually what's happening. They just keep yelling things that they can't prove, and they've lied about damn near everything I've ever seen them engage with. So why would we take them at face value? It's a good question. Here's what Lindsey Graham had to say. Same kind of continuation, same point.
Is a imminent threat, and it doesn't have to be imminent to me because you don't want it to be imminent. Right. The whole idea is for it not to be imminent, dumbass. You want to prevent it from being imminent.
Senator, let me ask you this because I find it.
Oh, it's so funny. We're just I don't think it sounds to me like neither of them understand what they're talking about right there. Eminent. The point at the end of the day is it's very simple, as I've just told you. If it's not eminent, then you just broke the law. Bottom line. Well, in fact, we already know that because you told us you struck first. And so we have it all tied up nice and neat. But what he's actually saying there is, well, it was eminent because they've been bad forever. But it wasn't really eminent, right? Come on, guys. We don't want to let it get to eminent. And that's where you're going to get the arguments online. You can't just let it be eminent. Now watch, look up that statement. You'll have 1,000 people going, that's just crazy, right? You're going to let it be eminent? I don't even think they know the word means. It's just so funny to me how these things populate. And here's what Trump had to add to it. First, Aaron Mate just said, because the Israel First administration can't keep their lies straight, Graham is effectively calling Rubio and others a dumbass for claiming, in Rubio's words, that there was absolutely an imminent threat from Iran. Here's what Trump says, right? This is from yesterday. So after all of what they said, here's what he comes out and says. And I think this is super important for the point.
But I thought we were going to have a situation where we were going to be attacked. They were getting ready to attack Israel. They were getting ready to attack others. You're seeing that right now.
Oh, you're seeing it right now. You mean, are you referring to the legal response to your illegal actions? Yeah, we are seeing that right now.
A lot of those missiles that are hitting in, those are stationary. Those were aimed there for a long period of time at these other countries.
Probably. But let's just assume we can prove that, like unlike everything else he tends to say. But if they were aimed at adversarial countries, why would that be necessarily important? All these countries have been working with the U.S. and Israel to manipulate what they're doing. So they're logically aware that there might be a threat from those locations. Do you think they don't have the same situation?
So I think I was right about that. We attacked first, and if we didn't, it could have been, look, we're really decimating them. They're being decimated.
It's just such a ridiculous game that's being played. These guys are just ridiculous. So the truth is, we attacked them first. There you go. As I wrote, if accurate, because who knows, that's a preemptive attack, as they call it, right? I mean, that's what he just described. Well, we thought they were going to bomb Iran, even though Rubio, as we'll get into next, came out and literally said that we thought Israel was going to bomb Iran, which would then cause us to get attacked, which he's now walking back. It's just crazy. Well, if accurate, that will be called a preemptive attack. Why is this important? Because, as I said, that would require congressional approval. Whereas a response to a genuinely imminent attack would be allowed under the War Powers Act. Saying we attacked first makes this unequivocal. Simple. Of course, that'll be suppressed as always. And guess what? Here's what Donald Trump had to say in 2013. The president must get congressional approval before attacking Syria. Big mistake if he does not. It's just ridiculous. I mean, more than I've ever seen in my entire time doing this. Like, we're at a place where that's why I often think that this is not just only incompetence. This feels like it's being done to us, doesn't it? I mean, how dumb can this get? Like, why would you put yourself in a position where you're, again, that sounds like there's some kind of maybe he's painted himself into a corner. That's exactly what it would look like. But it seems like more than that, doesn't it? Like, you could lie better than what they're doing right now. But here we are. Caroline Leavitt comes out and says, no, Rubio did not claim what he literally said on video. And Max says, desperation grips the White House as the Israel Gate crisis deepens. Trump's press secretary is turning to the Never Trump NRO for damage control. But there's no going back after Rubio's candid confession. She just simply goes, no, it didn't, and posted this article. First, here's what the White House Post said. So she's over here going, that didn't happen. Here's what the article says. Well, here's what you guys posted on Twitter. Quote, the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. Direct quote. He says, and we knew that if we didn't preemptively, too late, go after them before they launched those attacks. And again, we would assume that we can prove that would happen. Probably not. We would suffer higher casualties. And I'm willing to bet that's just what Israel fed them to get them to feel that was what might happen. Trump, most likely. As even Rubio said, remember in the language, he made it clear that someone told Trump this is the best choice. You know that's how this gets played. Now, we're going to go to him saying it in a second. This is the full clip, if you want to watch it. And there's a reason to, and I'll actually just go to the article because this is where they make the argument. I don't find it has merit. I'll show you why. It says, no, Marco Rubio didn't claim that Israel dragged Trump into a war with Iran. Whoa, hold on. That's quite a different framing, isn't it? So the question, tell me that didn't. Okay, good. The question here, first of all, she says, wrong one. Didn't claim. Okay, well, see, she said the same thing. They didn't, which by the reality of what he said is exactly that ultimately their actions forced us to do something. But realize, guys, what's everyone saying? What we're saying is that, just exactly what he said. We're not claiming anything other than what you said. Israel's actions forced you guys, or at least you claimed that, to take action that you would have otherwise not taken. Period. So to make it about dragging them into a war, that's the kind of nuance they abuse to make the argument that you're about to hear. It says, a large cadre of commentators have been arguing that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu dragged U.S. President Donald Trump unwillingly into the war with Iran. Again, quite a bit differently, right? Maybe he's willing to do this, but didn't want to do it then. Like, it's just about you're creating all these secondary points you're carving it out to make it sound like if he didn't literally drag him into this, then that's a lie. Even though he said it, if it's about why now, not versus why in general, that's what they're arguing. It says, at first blush, this theory received a boost from comments made by Marco Rubio on Monday, which, by the way, the theory didn't exist until he said that. Other than just the general sentiment that Israel's dictating policy, right? This is what kicked off the conversation. So for them to frame it as if the theory was going around and that gave it a boost, it either shows bad journalism or they're being manipulative. And as Max stated, I think he believes it's very manipulative. But when you listen to Rubio's full comments in context, it says it's pretty clear that he wasn't advancing this claim. So they say. So it says the second question I've been asked is why now? He goes, in answering this question, Rubio said, we knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. They cite it right there. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. So it seems pretty clear so far. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer casualties. Okay. So far, they're admitting that we were right. And it goes on to say, this is the clip that is being taken as proof. Right. It is, because it's his words. I mean, it's a weird argument to say. I mean, for just to be clear, even if you had like a larger clip that added more context, it wouldn't make the statement untrue. It's a weird way they're framing this. It would make it true. It would just be the bigger context makes it, you could misframe that, because he did say those things, guys. That's the reality. But it goes on to say the clip is being taken as proof that Netanyahu forced the U.S. to war. Again, you could argue by action made it, though they felt like they had to. It's a little bit different. But those making this argument are conflating the question why with the question why now. Okay, so whatever, fine. So you could argue that Trump had always planned this. And the point is still the same, that Israel's actions forced this to happen when they wouldn't have otherwise done it, even if it would be next week. You see the point? Like, this is a bad argument, unless your argument is only about the fact that they made this happen from nothing. I mean, at the end of the day, they are clearly influencing through forced action what Trump just did. Now, he says, in fact, if you watch the full press conference, which we showed you, Rubio makes this clear. At about 5 minutes mark, he is asked explicitly whether he was saying that the U.S. was forced to attack Iran because of an impending Israeli action, and he responds, no, of course. Now, yesterday we showed you both the original 130 clip that's being shared and the follow-ups. Both the follow-ups that day and the day after, blue and purple tie from yesterday. Now, it says that's the question of how, why now, he responds. But this operation needed to happen because Iran. Oh, that's a very clear explanation. Because Iran, bad guy. I mean, you might as well just say Iran, bad guy. That's exactly what I always point out. Because Iran, right? And it goes, in about a year or a year and a half, they would cross the line of immunity, meaning they would have so many short-range missiles and so many drones that nobody could do anything about it. Well, yeah, man. Why is that a crime for them to be better than you if that's what you're pointing out? That they have weapons and things they're building and you can't stop them. Okay. Now, look, I'm not, like, let's just pretend that they're everything they claim they are. This would still not be legal, you understand? And of course, we should demand that they actually prove what they're claiming. And it says, because they could hold the whole world hostage. Well, you're doing that right now. You and Israel have been doing that my entire life. And I've never seen Israel or Iran do even remotely what you're claiming. Doesn't mean it's not possible. But on top of that, what would be the objective there? What do you think the accomplishment is? They don't seem to claim they want to do anything like that. Israel, on the other hand, has a stated policy of taking more territory. And you are global ambitions, as we can all see. Trump, or rather the U.S. government, I'm going to be really honest about it because I don't think it's just Trump. But look at the damage they're doing now, he says. Yeah, you mean the legal responses to your actions. I mean, guys, this is not difficult, okay? Anybody who's honest is already going, man, this is very, very clear. And it says, and this is a weakened Iran. Imagine a year from now, right? Because boogeyman. So if we make it out that they're evil and bad and terrible, then a year from now, that's going to be even more evil. See how easy that is to show? Well, that means nothing. It's based on your fabrication of what they are to begin with. And it says, so that had to happen. Okay, well, so far he hasn't made any kind of a legal justification. Iran bad guy, so there you go. It's basically what he just said. Obviously, we were aware of Israel's intentions and understood what that would mean for us. And we had to be prepared to act as a result. Okay, did he not just end by going, and then they were right? So just because you argue that we always needed to stop Iran, which you've always said, doesn't change the reality of the point, which is that you did this now because Israel did something that made you have to. He just said that again. I mean, you have to realize how this is gaslighting. That's carry on leave. They're gaslighting you. They're going, that's not true. And then literally citing why it's true. And then I guess trying to make you feel like you're just not smart enough to understand the nuance. That's crazy to me. Now, I'm not disregarding the nuance. It just doesn't meet the point. You still got forced into this, or whatever term you want to use. Now, here is what he said versus what he's saying now. And this is a day apart, guys. And this, remember, like, why I wanted to read that to you. So you heard their response. You heard what they're claiming. They're claiming that's why this is taken out of context. So remember that. because I read it for you, but here's just the part where he stated it versus what he's saying today. I don't know how you can not act like this is objective, like self-evident.
Yesterday, you told us that Israel was going to strike Iran, and that's why we needed to get involved. Today, the president said that Iran was going to get.
Yeah, your statement is false. So that's not what I was asked very specifically. Were you there yesterday?
Yes, I asked.
Okay.
You got to love that. Well, were you there? Oh, yeah, I'm the one that asked the question. I heard you. I wrote it down. We're not dumb. Were you there? You know, it's a gotcha moment, and he failed, right? He was hoping, probably got unlucky that it just happened to be the same journalist, because if it wasn't, everyone would go, oh, they are Democrats, whatever. How embarrassing.
That's why we needed to get involved. Today, the president said that Iran was going to get.
Yeah, your statement is false. So that's not what I was asked very specifically. Were you there yesterday?
Yes, I asked.
Okay. And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act.
Pretty damn clear, isn't it? And he also used the word preemptively. So there you go. The ship has sailed, guys. There is no legal reality here. Now, look, even if they ultimately go to Congress, which seems to be flirting with right now, and they get an authorization for use of military force, well, technically right now, as far as I understand it, they're putting forward a war powers point to try to get that in conversation. And it looks like they might vote it down, which wouldn't surprise me because all of our government's corrupt. But what my point was, is even if they ultimately, after, let's say, the 60-day period we're talking about, ultimately get that, it doesn't make this, it still makes this first action illegal. They broke the law. And I'm willing to bet you that nothing ever happens, which is upsetting, because they should, no matter Biden or Obama or Trump or anybody, they're breaking the law. Why does that not matter? And all it's going to do is continue to create the reality where Democrats will do it next, Republicans will do it after that, and they'll point at each other like the scarecrow from Wizard of Oz. DD Geopolitics says the U.S. is so cooked, it's hilarious. This is a Democrat. And just like I showed you Blumenthal, I'm really worried, but this is necessary. It's like they're all just siding with the team. He asked him I'll just let it speak for itself. It's actually pretty funny. Now, I can't tell if he tried to walk away and then got blocked. I'm not sure, but this is what we're seeing everywhere. They're contradicting themselves. They're making themselves look like they don't know what's going on, probably because they really don't.
I think Israel, forced the U.S.'s hand here, boxed the U.S. in on this.
Look, no one wants it.
Really quickly, by the way, just like we told you from before, tell me this is not an obvious opportunity for the deep state pedophile Democrats to go after Trump, like you keep telling us that's all they want to do, and to go, he broke the law, impeachment. Instead, they side with him. I mean, how much more do you need to see? If they were in any way adversarial, they would not side with him where he's doing the wrong thing, where he's objectively breaking the law. Every day, conservatives, honest conservatives, are starting to see the reality.
A nuclear war. No one wants a nuclear.
Forced the U.S.'s hand here, boxed the U.S. in on this.
Look, no one wants a nuclear war. No one wants a nuclear Israel, but we certainly don't want an endless war, plain and simple. What did I say?
Nuclear Israel.
Oh, no. Got it. Let me say that again. No one wants an endless war, but we certainly don't want a nuclear Iran. That's for sure.
How funny is that? So basically, he just made a mistake, or like that's what he's creating. Oops, did I say Israel? Freudian slip is what I would call it, even though Israel already has nukes and everybody knows that. But so bottom line is, he supports it. We can't let there be a nuclear Iran. Well, guess what? That's not what's happening. The evidence does not back that up. And we'll, for the umpteenth time, make that clear today. And you think these people don't know this, guys? I mean, if their own government, their own intelligence, and the institution they point to, the IAEA, all of them tell you that, why would they claim otherwise? You see, the answer's right there, because Israel says. It's always how this is working. So here, just to continue the point of the absurdity of contradiction, is what we saw it yesterday, but just play it again. Like, this is where we are. This is obvious to anybody who's not dishonest. They're lying to you. They're playing games, okay? Here's the point about war.
We may have casualties. That often happens in war.
I don't know if this is technically a war.
We didn't start this war, but under President Trump, we are finishing it.
This isn't a war. We haven't declared war.
The Secretary of Defense, who calls himself the Secretary of War, said today this is a war.
We set the terms of this war from start to finish.
Nobody should classify this as war. It is combat operations.
War is hell and always will be.
Strategic strikes are not war.
And of course, you watch like Luna or any, they're like just so smug and dismissive, and they're also wrong. And also, she said, they're boots on the ground. There's no boots on the ground. And then like that, like almost less than 24 hours later, they said, well, there might be boots on the ground. It's okay. Well, then your entire premise was ridiculous because they're already telling you that might be happening. It's a game, guys. It's a game, and they're holding the line. That's how this works. Now, that's another example of this, by the way, which is almost more embarrassing. And I just think these people are like jockeying for like position and how much they can benefit from all this horrible, like the profiteering, every time a country like Gaza or Iraq or Syria, these people are jockeying for how much they can benefit from all the terrible things they're doing, or just to gain clout and influence in Trump's administration. Here's what another one of these people tried to tell you.
You'll concede this is war. You'll concede this is war.
We haven't declared war. They declared war on us, but we haven't.
War. Secretary Hegseth.
We haven't declared.
Just now, you said this is war.
They called it war.
They called it war. What I was saying. Okay, well, that was a misspoke. What I was saying that they declared war on us, but war is ugly. It always has been ugly. But we're taking out a regime that's been trying to attack us for quite some time.
But you're not.
So he comes in and says it's war, and then says, what do you mean it's not war? It's like, you just said it was war. They're just all spun, guys. That's crazy. And then you go on to describe why war is bad. Like, then, okay, even if that's not, even like, let's say they started it. If you're engaging back, then you're in war, guys. Now, that changes the reality of whether or not you have to declare it and go through approval, right? But to just play this game like we're totally not in a war is ridiculous. And it's also even more because they absolutely initiated this. The reasoning is always because, like, going back to World War II forward, like, they just don't want to, it's a big deal. And Trump doesn't want to be seen for going to war. It's a narrative game, guys. And it's just obvious. And because they keep yelling this, not that you need to see this, but it's very obvious, according to even Grok. Show it to the conservatives out there that keep yelling this. Now, what I'm noticing is that argument in every comment of people going, Iran's the one that declared war, like I was saying. Now, I think like most of them, whether that guy recently or I think Johnson and so on are, saying it in order to get people to think that. Some of them online, though, are absolutely under the mindset that this actually happened, that they declared war. No, they did not. They've never formally declared war in the United States. And even what you want to point to in regard to whether you don't like kinetic action, conflict, invasion, or whatever we're talking about, whether it's Iraq or Iran or in this case the Iran hostage crisis or the Ajax and later 79 revolution. The point is, none of these things in any case have ever been declarations of war, and that they don't even consist to a formal. There's examples where, like, for example, they bomb it's funny, if the U.S. assassinates the president of a foreign country, that is by default becoming a war, according to anybody in the past. But I just want to make sure we understand that, because this is not some point where Iran stood up and said, I'm declaring war on the United States, but that's what a lot of conservatives are saying. Now, to get into all the vast stuff, which we've touched on in recent, more than once in the past, but once recently over the last, I think, so many weeks, there's a lot of examples of these conversations in regard to these hostage crises or different embassy points, or, the things they briefly list here, but a lot of different points you could point out in the past. Like I've always said, guys, these people have committed crimes like any government has. But the reality of most of these situations are far more nuanced than they're just evil people doing things to the United States. In most cases, it was manipulated. You see assets in there from Mossad and CIA, and there's a whole lot of situations like this. Libya is an obvious example. You know how much they lied to us about that? And we can look back and see very clearly what actually happened. And it amounted to this person being murdered, basically raped to death in the streets. I mean, we can get into Libya. We can get into the reality of what was going on, the free healthcare and free education. And, it was one of the largest, highest quality of life in all of Africa. Sure as hell's not that now, regardless of what you wanted to claim he was doing. And on top of all of it, when I saw this, I couldn't believe it happened, only because it's so obviously manipulative. From what everyone has talked about, this has become such a very large conversation. The idea of Charlie Kirk for the podcast, the idea of what he was saying then, what he's saying, what's going on now, his points about Iran and what was happening with Trump. I mean, their own people will stood up and ask these questions to people like Cruz or Glenn Beck, about Israel and about Charlie Kirk, and they all got super uncomfortable. The point is, their audience is very aware. And when this happened with Iran, apparently most of the Turning Point audience was outraged, because they understand what Kirk was telling them. that this was not this is Israel doing this was the point. And Charlie Kirk said that. So what do? Turning Point USA literally puts out a video of Charlie Kirk that tried to insinuate that he is for the war on Iran. And it says, because it was a quote where he was saying, if you're serious about actually protecting human rights, you should want to make Iran Western again, is what he wrote and what he says. And ultimately saying, how much do you actually know about Iran? Now, that's not the same thing as supporting the invasion of it for a foreign country. Or you could argue he changed his mind. The point is, this clip in no way represents what he was saying before he was killed. And I'm talking like for the year before he was killed. And even this says the clip predates Charlie Kirk's 2025 statement calling regime change in Iran pathologically insane. He opposed war, or this war for clarity. And so they show you an old clip. And as Max writes, Turning Point USA got community noted for deliberately misrepresenting Charlie Kirk's vehement opposition to U.S. war on Iran. How do you make sense of that other than, Israel or the United States are dictating what they do to the point to where it's contradicting Charlie's memory? Doesn't that speak to the entire point of what we've been saying about it? Everything, what happened, why it happened? Imagine being assassinated in front of your wife, Max writes, then having her willfully sell out your convictions and taint your legacy in front of the entire world. How is he wrong? It's no different than Bondi in the sense of the lying about him, coming up and telling you hate speech is not the same as free speech, and using Charlie Kirk to make the argument, even though he explicitly said the opposite. Every one of these points alone should be enough to change someone's mind about these people. I think it already is. Now, thanks to Brandon Circus yesterday, he pointed this out to me. The article, which you can easily look up, Trump calls Kurdish leaders in Iran war effort. Now, this is so hilarious how this all went down, and in regard to their lying about it, but ultimately how it's what it's happening now, it's very serious. And in fact, Robert Inlakesh literally called this. He called this he actually discussed this as well as, I believe it was, I forget, it was the Azerbaijan or Armenian groups that were in these, basically arguing that these kind of groups were going to be utilized to initiate this kind of action, which again, you could argue is not, I'm sure other people can see that possibility, but I just want to point out yet again that he called this accurately. So Brandon Circus brought this to my attention yesterday and says basically, come fight for us in Iran. We promise you the state we've always offered. And he goes, I know we just abandoned you in favor of Al-Qaeda in Syria, but it's different. And it's what, like the fifth time they've used them and promised them a state and then abandoned them. And it's pretty crazy. And so here's where we are today. CIA working to arm Kurdish forces to spark uprising in Iran. The CIA is working to arm Kurdish forces with the aim of fomenting a popular uprising in Iran. Multiple people familiar with the plan told CNN. The Trump administration has been in active discussions with Iranian opposition groups and Kurdish leaders in Iraq about providing them with military support, right? Because Iraq is very much involved in this conversation. And that's also part of it right now with Iran. We're going to get to the blackout that just happened and what's going on there. But for those already, they're going to go, Ryan, you're CNN, they're lie. Well, guess what? Trump's already admitted it. So sit down. So the reality, guys, is that this is happening and that we've seen this building. It's not new. They've been working with them since, even before the Syria conversation. And the reality is that this is a manipulative proxy element they're using to destabilize countries. It's very, very clear. And so what you're seeing is them even, what's interesting is first it's being sourced, someone's telling them about it. They deny it. And then they simply own it. And I'll show you what I mean. So I'll point out what he said. This is where I saw it. He says, Seamus says, remember this headline when you start seeing reports on Instagram or stories about an organic, spontaneous uprising in Western Iran, right? That's usually how this goes. And I'm willing to bet you that even happens, even though we see it so clearly. And in case you're not following, I'll show you what I mean. So right here, Carrie Ann Leavitt denied this. I believe it was yesterday. She came out and said, that's not true. Or rather, just simply that Trump has not agreed to any such plan. But what we can prove now is that he did, and it's been going on for weeks. So as always, they lie, right? But you could argue they're national security or whatever, but they just lie to you. They always do this. And then the next day, they show you that they were lying to you. And so the reality of this is they were building this for quite a long time. And they denied this right here. And I think immediately it got shown, whether because people are leaking stuff or whatever. And then less than 24 hours, it seems they put out a massive PR campaign to basically own this is happening. Or at least that's how I'm kind of seeing it. It's hard to tell because it all happened in very short succession. So first, hear what she said.
Thank you, Caroline. Two questions. The Trump administration reportedly is considering arming Kurdish forces in the hopes of inspiring. Thank you, Caroline. 2 questions. The Trump administration reportedly is considering arming Kurdish forces in the hopes of inspiring a popular uprising in Iran. Could you comment on that report?
I can comment on the fact that the president has held many calls with partners, allies, and leaders in the region, in the Middle East. He did speak to Kurdish leaders with respect to our base that we have in northern Iraq. But as for any report suggesting that the president has agreed to any such plan is completely false and should not be written.
Well, so you could argue maybe that, he was discussing it and hasn't been agreed to. But the reality shows otherwise. Now, this shouldn't even be that big of a deal because they lie all the time. And even this, you would argue, might even be sort of justifiable if it's like we don't want to leak our plan, right? But just take note. It's always the lies. Now, from there, and I think it's more important to show that the timeline. So ultimately tried to deny it. Now, if they were going to deny it, or rather planned to point to this, then why would they deny it first? It still may line up, but here's a Daily Mail article from today. Kurds could begin ground operation in Iran within days after being secretly armed by the U.S. for months, according to the sources. The Kurds living in Western Iran could begin a rebellion, and it wouldn't be a rebellion; it would be an insurrection or a what's the term I'm looking for when it's a there's a term for that when it's groups within fighting. Either way, the point is it's being done by the U.S. government and Israel. You're creating a force, and we can see it. They've now owned it. It's publicly discussed, but yet it's a rebellion. I mean, we're already there. We're already seeing it being called an uprising and rebellion, and that's not the reality of it. This is an invasion, guys. And whether you're using other forces or not, it's still the same thing, armed by the United States. The U.S. and Israel are thought to be seeking an armed uprising, again, and have been smuggling weapons to Kurdish volunteers since last year. Yeah, so they're trying to make it sound like a popular, though. They just care about their country. You mean the Kurds that you're basically bringing in from Iraq? And by the way, there was examples of them already bombing locations in Kurdish Iran before this. So it seems more likely that people there don't want to be involved, and ultimately that they're bringing people in from elsewhere, which, by the way, is what they've done every time. Rat lions and people from Turkey into the Syria conversation. Like, they've moved these terrorist groups that they arm and work with around the world. And I'm not even necessarily talking about just the Kurds, but there was an overlap. I made that point back then. People didn't like that, who supported the group, but they're working alongside in many cases, I showed you, Syrian defense forces. And, these are terrible groups. It comes after President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu urged the Iranian people to take back their country and overthrow the current regime. In and of itself would be an insane thing if anybody else did it in the world. And it still is. Now, here is what Spectator, the Index reports. CNN reports about the CIA working with Kurdish forces in Iran, and Asal Rod highlights what Jerusalem Post added to it. She writes, this is not about liberation. They want to foment chaos, collapse, and ultimately partition Iran, like they're doing everywhere else, like they're doing in Syria. It's like they want to do in Gaza. It's like, this is what they're doing. I mean, the entire origin of like the Middle East, going back to Brzezinski and like the beginning with Afghanistan was about the balkanization of the Middle East. That's the same kind of idea, right? And then, carving it up and give it, even before that, when you're talking about, any number of discussions, as far as you want to go back from like a U.S. war front, it's always like this idea of taking and then carving it up in ways that benefit us in like the maximum, whether it's resources or geostrategic control, getting our guy there and this person there. And so there's never a cohesive country that has to fight you anymore. And this is what they do everywhere. And there's been arguments over the years about just Africa as a whole, trying to make sure that it never really rises up to realize its potential, because then they'll have influence in the world. And this is what they wrote from the Israeli media. Number 6 on the list was to forge a Middle East coalition for Iran's partition. Encourage long-term plans for a federalized or partitioned Iran. So their point is, make sure this gets broken up and it never comes back to what it was. How is that what Iranians want? No, guys, it never was. None of this is what Iranians want, and that's the truth. So, Inevitable West writes, Donald Trump has done the impossible. This is today. So suddenly, it goes from her denying it to now what's happening, and we're amazing. He has boots on the ground in Iran. Whoa, wait a minute. Is that what's happening? Well, we're going to get into Israel claiming it's already going on, but from the U.S. perspective, it's something they're planning. It's a very weird thing. But the MAGA media has a way, rather the manipulative side of it, of just kind of adding, like you have a thing that might be, and they just kind of add different layers to it and put on a fake picture and yell it out loud. It goes million views, and and it's just not even remotely true. Happens every day. Donald Trump has done the impossible. Iraqi Kurds have stepped up and pledged allegiance to the United States. Guys, these groups have been kind of fluctuated and used by them forever. And I don't call it allegiance, if you understand how this has ever worked. But as he writes, making fun of them, bread and circus, the impossible. He goes, the Western predator class has been hiring mercenaries to invade Iran since at least Alexander the Great, 330 BCE. Whether you think it's accurate or not, just the point is that they've been trying to do this forever. It's not some impossible thing to get proxy forces to invade Iran. They've been doing this everywhere in the world. But MAGA media is making out to be some big deal. We're changing the world. How absurd the Hasbara is. It correlates precisely with how indefensible the policy is. But here's what Israeli media is saying. No, you could take this as them lying to put us in a position, or as I tend to see, it's both of those things happen all the time, but as I tend to see in many of the situations, they'll jump ahead and yell the thing that makes the U.S. look bad. And in this case, Kurdish officials speaking with Israeli media, they claim, tell them that Kurdish forces in Iraq have already launched a ground offensive into Iran. So that seems to be why that's being reported over there. But interesting how the deviation between, so is Israel just now guiding our media talk conversation as well? It seems like the MAGA media is queuing on what Israel has to say in some cases. The dishonest ones anyway. Okay, so based on what they're saying, there is now an actual invasion underway being funded by the CIA and the U.S. government in Israel, and that's apparently a rebellion. It's an uprising for freedom. Well, as Mark Ames writes, and I think this is very, very much worth considering, and this is just somebody reporting down here, Kurdish forces in Iraq have launched a ground military offensive, right? According to Israel's media. Now, I've also seen, though, a lot. Now, I don't want to say I've seen, and maybe they're out there like with the White House necessarily owning this plan in the moment, but I've seen this interesting push from the people that tend to be repeating what the White House wants people to hear, who are seemingly backing this up. So as he writes, and I agree, he goes, I've never seen a covert CIA separatist military operation like the moderate rebels or any number of examples in every field of war they've ever existed in. He's never seen it so heavily advertised. As it's happening, as widely, as loudly as they can PR it, public relations. He says, you'd almost think the CIA was running a deception operation here to stoke IRI paranoia and get them to massacre the local Kurds. Well, I guess we'll be following this. We'll have to see how this goes. The truth is, we just said there's at least reports of them bombing those Kurdish locations. So maybe there's some truth to this. Maybe there's a situation here where they're trying to create like a wag the dog scenario to execute some kind of plan. This is where we are today. Either way, it's incredible to me that we're at the same moment seeing them kind of caught funding in separatist groups within a foreign country. And can you imagine what the reverse would be if that was being done by a foreign country in the United States? I mean, you already know. And that's somehow, we're fighting for freedom, and by the way, it also shows you that they've been planning this well before what they claim was some kind of an imminent reaction, right? They armed them with the intention to do this. That also brings into a different light the idea of the talks with Iran. So we're back here pretending we're going to have some kind of an agreement while you're planning to invade the country and then bomb them in the location where they're meeting to discuss your offered deal. Come on, guys. It's like everything else. If you're an honest person, you're not ridiculous. That's quite obvious. They planned to hurt them, and they used negotiations to lie to them, like with Soleimani. In fact, that becomes more relevant in a second with the Iraq part, which is where they used the offer to bring him into Iraq. And why they needed that? Because the authorization required it to be in Iraq. It's very simple. So Trump goes peace, and Soleimani comes because he's not a monster, and he bombs him in the Iraq airport. That's the story. And they go on to go, monster, thousands of Americans, in Iraq while you were illegally invading. It's the same old story, and I don't think that's a good thing. I don't want Americans to die, but you're responsible for that, not me. Ryan Grimm points out, in regard to the war powers part of this, that the Maha movement, now at least this statement coming from some of them at the higher level of that kind of whatever you call that. And I mean, the real people that want America healthy again, not the team sport politics part of Trump's team that pretended to do that. So what he's showing is that now Maha, at least these grouping of them, have fully broke with Trump. lobbying for passage of the War Powers Resolution, which would hinder his ability to do what he's doing. I kind of take that back, but that's how they see it. I just don't think that's where this is going to go, even if they pass that, because they already have avenues to abuse this. And on top of that, they don't seem to care about the law or the courts or impeachment. So why would they follow anything they don't want to follow anyway? Either way, it's worth pointing out that they believe this will do something positive. At least that's what's being framed as, and that they're breaking with Trump. As the Maha people, guys, like the high-level people, that's super important to me. You can read it. I think this is happening a lot more than people realize. And as Steve and I have been telling you for years, I think, but at least since this election, this has been clear since the beginning. People were Stargate forward, as far as I could tell, people were like, okay, this is obvious. And day by day, it's become more clear. Josiah makes this post about the article, the Russian point that I was talking about earlier. And this is it's by, how do you say that? Fedor Lukyanov, editor-in-chief of what is the magazine? Russia in Global Politics. Now, so take that like you would any other platform, whether American or Russian or Chinese or whatever. It's funny how we have a different, I already know people out there going, oh, it's Russian, it's probably blah, blah, blah. It's just information. It might as well be printed on a piece of paper with nobody's name on it. Read it, think about it, consider it, investigate it. That's all you get to do. And the reality is what he's highlighting in this article right here is actually, to me, it's exact. It's clear. There's no error in here. What they're doing is changing the global dynamic. And that's what I've been telling you for a long time. As Josiah writes, under the old law of war that existed prior to World War II, outright assassination of a foreign head of state was condemned by all civilized powers. Now, here and in the article, I think they point out that doesn't mean they actually cared or that they didn't do it in their own ways, or behind the scenes or whatever. But at the very least, it was kind of a publicly acknowledged reality that wasn't, that if done like we just saw it, that's just not allowed. And that's condemned action, sort of like mafia enforcing on itself, if you will. You do it that public, you just can't allow it, right? You could think of it that way, or maybe they just had more integrity back then. However you want to look at it. The truth is that was the reality. We all saw it back then, that it was condemned. And even, I'm talking even like Kim Jong-un or whatever, because my opinion, because they know that creates unstable situations, which only lead to more war and chaos. But guess what, guys? That's what these people want. Because at some point, these disgusting power force structures they realized, well, wait a minute. Not doing that is the right thing. And that's the best for humans and life and freedom and whatever, whether foreign countries or not. But if we don't care about any of that, and instead we destabilize those countries surreptitiously, then we can benefit like crazy from that. And we can still come out here and yell freedom and go, that's bad, and we want to help, and then be over here underlining their whole situation. Cutting deals behind the scenes to take their resources or going in there and stealing them ourselves. And it only grew from there. You can talk about fruit companies in South America to exactly what's happening today. Or what Venezuela is selling out the oil field. It's the same thing. And so they realized that if we keep them destabilized and unable to build a defense or any kind of semblance of government, then we can just do what we want whenever we want. And even on top of that, play the hero card, even though we're not doing that. You see how clear that is? And so there was a point where that clearly, whether it was narrative before or not, transitioned into being the reality. He says the goal was to limit violence by, at least the statements of it, by bracketing off the government and people as lawful targets. Militaries fight militaries, right? Governments are off limits in regard to like a general versus the president. Or, for example, Khomeini, who is this, you could think of it like the Pope in the sense of a U.S. Catholicism perspective, because that's what we're talking about. This was not some, think about if Iran assassinated the Pope and what that would be doing to the Christian right now. That's what they just did. And arguing that somehow it's going to walk this down, like make it less crazy or, and even as I said before, I'll show you this again in a second, their own CIA assessment told them that that's not how that would go. And you got Jenkins out there lying about it anyway. And it says there was a hard-headed reason for this being the way it was. Keeping the opposing government in place made wars less brutal and existential by preserving the continuity and stability of powers and power that made effective peace treaties possible. Now, you could also argue from a very globalist perspective that they're all ultimately, whether they fight in some ways or not, at the end of the day, that they all had agreements that we're just going to make sure we all stay in power. But some cases, I do think that's how these things kind of work. But I shouldn't even water it down with that because it makes it more confusing for those that are, the point is where we're at right now is that what we all told ourselves, at least what we saw, was different before. What they're doing now is only opening that door for everybody else, especially like the actual crazy people out there. Like any other groups out there, the other countries we're not talking about who are, maybe destabilized because of foreign action from these governments, or maybe because, whatever you want to talk about, or groups that they're arming, Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Now you open this position where this is just the norm. It says, but now that every enemy of the United States is apparently a terrorist. There's no ground for negotiations or lasting peace. None of this has anything to do with whether the Ayatollah was a good man. Those judgments between sovereign powers mean nothing. Everyone thinks he's everyone thinks he is good and his enemies are bad. See, it's just subjective ridiculousness, and that's where they're manipulating people to think that they are the kind of arbiter of what is good and not. In light of this reality, the goal should be to limit the destructive effects, of those moral claims by removing them as a subject of warfare. Because, by the way, that's claiming somebody's a bad person is not a justifiable reason from a military or international perspective to take more legal action or war kinetic action. By assassinating the Ayatollah, the United States has set a precedent for future wars that threatens to make those conflicts even more radical and violent than they should be. I think that's by design. That move was a mistake, and we should say as much. So here's the article. Today, the fundamental limiting elements of international relations are being dismantled. Now, there's some parts that I think are sort of a translation issue because it's in Russian. So I'll point it out when I get there. It says, the war against Iran promises to worsen international chaos, despite what they're promising. Remember that. Regardless of the outcome of the current crisis, the attack by the United States and Israel on Iran will have serious consequences for the world politics. And they said the same with Iraq. With everyone, in fact, and all of them ended up being catastrophes. And I think that was what they wanted, frankly. It is not only and not so much about the prospects of the Islamic Republic itself. The question is the perception of what is possible and acceptable in international relations. This perception is changing, and change does not bode well for the future. It's worth starting with the fact that appealing to international law, which in theory underlies any diplomacy, makes no sense. In 2002, 2003, when the United States was preparing to invade Iraq, very important, guys, it still believed it was necessary to waste time and effort, as they would frame it today, trying to achieve a corresponding UN Security Council resolution. Why? What is that no longer? No, it's still the reality. So why does Trump pretend like it doesn't matter? Because the Constitution was the same, the laws were the same. Well, because at that point, they were still at least feigning to care about the process. It goes the famous Colin Powell test tube. Remember where he holds up the thing? Then he lied about that, which was supposed to prove the presence of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Was presented at the UN meeting and a carefully prepared rhetorical accompaniment. He says they couldn't convince me, but they tried and considered it desirable. I think that means like they considered it, enough. But they lied. Remember that. They got caught. This time, it doesn't even occur to me, he says, neither last summer nor how have the initiators of the forceful action turned to international authorities for approval of their actions. See, it's kind of a translation thing. The point is, they didn't even try. Why? Because UN is Hamas or whatever the dumb things they're saying. It ultimately was just a way to circumvent any kind of a check on their power. It says now in the United States, they are rising to the issue of internal legality. It's pointing out that Americans are going, well, regardless of international law that you clearly broke, what you're doing is a crime in this country. And it says Trump did not have the right to actually declare war on another country without the permission of Congress. And it says George W. Bush, by the way, received such permission for Iraq in advance. Now, this overly simplistic way to say that, but ultimately did. And it says, and I'll show you in a second, but this is due to the political situation in the United States itself. External relations do not matter. It says the United States, it turns out, cynically used dialogue to lull people to sleep and take them by surprise. That's what we saw. That's what they did in Lebanon. It's what they did in Venezuela. I mean, every place I can point to, but clearly we just saw them get caught doing that here. We saw them do it in Lebanon, where they bombed them in that room where they were meeting for negotiations. As I'll get to, Soleimani was the same point. It says, what conclusion will those who are in the diplomatic process with Washington or who will have to do so? See, that's the same kind of thing. What conclusion will those who are in diplomatic process with Washington or who will have to do so draw? Like basically saying, what are they going to do if they're in the middle of a process with the United States? You can't believe anything at all, right? You can't take them seriously. They violate everything they do. I say it all the time. You should rely only on yourself and your strength. And at a minimum, have an argument that your counterpart cannot ignore. it's even more difficult. The supreme leader of Iran was not only destroyed by a targeted strike, but this destruction was declared a great achievement and a blessing for the future resolution of conflict, despite it being like verifiably the opposite, even according to the U.S. intelligence. However, Khamenei is a legitimate, according to the laws of his country, head of state, a member of the United Nations, recognized, or he was, by almost everyone in a full participant in all forms of international relations, including political negotiations with the organizers of the attack, which have continued to this day. I mean, you're talking, I mean, this is somebody, it's like every other point we made. It's like them deciding to kill the head of state in any other country because they just decide they need to. That's where it is. And I mean, this is a person who is literally a member of the United Nations, who was in, like, as they're highlighting, was participating in these negotiations, was like, if they're engaging with them as if he's a legitimate part of the negotiation. So there's no denying that they did this to trick them so they could kill them. There's just something like disgustingly dishonest about that. Like vile, like a, not just surreptitious. There's a better word for that. You know, where it's sinister, right? I mean, like what you're doing is like, oh, I'm going to get to a clip from Hegseth in a minute, where he just comes out and says, you know, we're taking advantage of them. We're kicking them while they're down, or we're hitting them while they're down because it's not a fair fight. Like, okay, why do you think that's a good thing to say? In no context does that analogy ever mean the right thing. Boxing, any sport. So you punch them while they're down? No, that's bad. You don't do that. I mean, even in warfare, it's always been discussed as some kind of a, you know, like the revolution, for example, in America, they meet for Christmas. You know, it's like there's a moment where you can acknowledge we're at war, but we can respect, or we can have, you know, that's never been the case for these people, in my experience. And I'm talking about like the current reality of our government and Israel's government. That ultimately they've gone to a position where there is nothing sacred anymore. And they're going to the level where they're creating, like they're just challenging things that were held sacred, like the discussion of a negotiation. Because if that's not there, then there's never a negotiation ever again, because no one's ever going to trust it. The murder of the head of one state by the forces of another state and by decision of its leadership in accordance with the same model as the leaders of terrorist organizations, drug cartels, are eliminated is a fundamentally different dimension of world politics. Guys, it's a very good point. Cartels, drug terrorist groups, whatever. That's what they do, right? They just go kill somebody because they decide they're a challenge to their religion or whatever you think drives their ideas. So in any real sense, how is that different from what they just did? They have an ideological drive. In fact, they're pretty extreme religiously, and we'll get to that. It's a whole thing. But ultimately, they just decide that guy bad, so we're going to go kill him. I mean, just because you claim you've got some right to do it, that's the whole thing. It's like some divine right, it would seem. And it makes them exactly the same from any kind of a legal standpoint, even compared to previous cases of regime change, right? From their U.S. government regime changes. It's a different reality, including violent endings such as the lynching of Gaddafi in Libya, right? Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Both of those, despite how it started, this is possible thanks to external military intervention. But Gaddafi was killed by Libyan opponents. But let's be real. I think there's more to it than that in regard to people that were on the ground that were working with, you know, CIA or whatever. But nonetheless, on the record, it wasn't them. Hussein executed by trial in an Iraqi court. So that just doesn't count anymore, right? These people are, why? They wanted you to think they cared about process. We care about evidence because we're better than our enemies. Today, they're like, no, we're not. We're strong. Shut up. That's what you get. And both episodes, it says the case of Iran is different. Oh, sorry. It says, no matter how one evaluates his objectivity, the ultimate point was they did these in ways that were clearly meeting that demand for some kind of process. And it says the case of Iran is different. It is a reproduction of the method that Israel applied to the heads of Hezbollah, Hamas. And the United States fully supports it. Right? Killed them because we say bad. The fundamental constraining elements of international relations that have been preserved from previous eras are being dismantled. Recognition of the legitimacy of states turns out to be due to specific circumstances. It's not that before everyone acted extensively in accordance with the norms of law. I'm glad he says that. And morality. The latter is interpreted differently depending on cultural traditions, where you are, right? It's subjective, right? People have different opinions on what, that's the reality of the world. But certain boundaries were present, even amongst that conversation. And now they don't even exist. That should be alarming, guys. So again, if you missed that earlier point, what they're doing, why does that not create the justification for some new radical group to come out and go, screw it, we're going to take what we want because we're strong, because we can, because we're willing to go that far? That's what they're showing you. Firstly, negotiating with the Americans makes almost no sense, he writes. The real question is either about capitulation or about imitation, like I think pretending, like fronting, in preparation for a forceful solution. So basically pretending to deal for war. Second, that's capitulation, meaning do what we say, or we're going to pretend to deal with you and then bomb you. Isn't that what we see every day? Secondly, a situation is quite plausible when there is nowhere to retreat and nothing to lose. And then any of the last arguments is legitimate. Then type of a red button that is available is literal or figurative. I think the point they're trying to say there, the translation issue, is ultimately that you create a situation where it's all or nothing, right? Red lines, but it's like it's built in a way to manipulate you into having no other choice. Even if an improved semblance of Venezuela, for example, comes to fruition, there with a behind-the-scenes agreement to transfer power to some hands that suit everybody, such social engineering will not reassure other regimes that oppose the United States, right? Because everyone can see what they just did. Whether or not it ends up as a positive reality for Venezuela, you did it through illegal means. And so all it creates is a situation where no one's going to believe that you're ever trying to do the right thing. The mechanism for changing control and bringing it under control has been outlined. This is a much tougher option than even the color revolutions in the 2000s. Opposition to it will grow stronger and become more desperate, which they'll then simply point to say, look, they're terrorists. How this tends to work, even though they're justified because of what they're doing is illegal, with consequences that in a certain scenario become fatal. Once again, it makes sense to turn to the 2003 Iraq campaign. It became a turning point, after which the entire structure of the region created in the 20th century began to crumble. By design, right? That's what the plan was. The rapid defeat of the Iraqi army and the overthrow of Saddam Hussein gave rise to euphoria, falsely, and a feeling of the ability to effectively rebuild the entire region according to American views. In reality, everything went differently. And I argue they knew that from day one. I don't even think they had intentions to make this country better. Controllability began to drop sharply. And those who were not the ones who were counting on... and those who were not the ones they were counting on strengthened. By the way, the rise of Iran, which largely determined the current conflict, was also stimulated by the elimination of the previous Iraqi regime. You could say that's by design, and it very well may be. But it's also worth considering that these ridiculous, clumsy authoritarians will essentially go in, take what they want, destroy everything, and then just walk away. And then what that leads to, they then justify for the next criminal action. I mean, you can say this about every country they've been involved in. They created the situation. Whether you're talking about the, shooting protesters and blaming it on the government to justify doing what they do, or simply by their belligerent actions, they cause these things to be created as blowback or whatever you want to call it, and then go, look, see, bad stuff, when all you're pointing to is things that you created. I mean, in a way, it's the same thing we're dealing with right now with this exact situation with Iran. The transformation of Iran, if it happens as a result of aggression, again, transfers the entire regional situation to another phase. The idea of Trump and his inner circle for the Middle East is quite simple. Israel's military force dominance in the region, combined with the intensification of Israel's economic interaction with the Gulf monarchies in the interest, first of all, of the United States. So basically, Israel does whatever it wants, and we benefit from that. If Iran in its current form can be eliminated, or at least radically weakened, then the military commercial scheme will gain prospects. Commercial, meaning that's always what this comes down to. The idea of building in Iran for the benefit of their elitist circles, which they're already salivating about. Trump was convinced that the dividends, if successful, were very large. Control not only over the vicinity of the Gulf, but also influence over a significant part of the adjacent territories from the Caracas to Central Asia. See, he sees history. I'll be remembered. I'll be the one that changed everything. I changed the face of the world. It'll be called Trump land, probably. The bottom line, he was convinced, probably by Israel, to see how this would benefit him. And that's all. Who cares about the law? Who cares about U.S. interest, America first? I will be forever lionized by doing this. I will make billions of dollars. Everybody will love me in the inner circles who make billions of dollars. That's where this goes. And this opens up qualitatively, by the way, my opinion, obviously, this opens up qualitatively different commercial opportunities, which is at the center of the worldview of Trump and his associates, as anybody can see who's not lying to themselves. The emphasis on naked force and coercion in world politics is growing. Rampant lawlessness, even hypocritical moral or ideological frames, meaning, like we keep seeing, hypocrisy everywhere. Are they no longer, it says even hypocritical moral or ideological frames, and they are no longer needed. How to feel, I guess what they're saying there is basically committing, naked force and coercion, but, basically going, but this is us, how'd you frame it? Like, so coming out and just violently attacking somebody, but claiming, for example, that it was necessary, justified, preemptive self-defense. That's what they're saying. But now the point is they don't even need that. It's going to turn to a point to where it's just naked aggression because we're justified. That's what we're talking about. At least, we went from a place where that was something that didn't happen and there was more of a process to now just going, well, we do it, but because Article 1 or whatever, right? Or Article 2, just why the power? And then what he's saying is then that is no longer necessary. It's just we're in power. Shut up. And it says how to feel about this is a personal matter for everyone, but one cannot ignore it. It's well written. Reza Nasri points out and this is because the Israeli Israel Katz, what was, I forget his position off the top of my head now. Someone high up in the Israeli government says every leader appointed to the Iranian terror regime to continue and lead the plan to destroy Israel, many of which, by the way, Trump was claiming he was the ones he wanted to end up in power, to threaten the United States and the free world with what? That's not happening. And the countries of the region, and to suppress the Iranian people, will be an unequivocal target for elimination, they write. It does not matter what his name is or the place where he hides. So again, what that means, by the way, on top of what this guy says is if they're in Florida, we'll bomb Florida. As they've already claimed so many times. America first, though, right, guys? Israel is normalizing the targeted assassinations of state officials in a manner that constitutes one of the most blatant, unprecedented, and shameful violations of the UN Charter. It states the UN Security Council, the Secretary General, and regional organizations fail to strongly and unequivocally condemn this practice. If they do that, if they fail to, it risks establishing a dangerous precedent, turning such criminal actions into the accepted norm. Which again, like we just read, what they're saying is, we don't care where they are. We don't care if they're not military. We'll kill them because we've argued they're bad. Khomeini was not military. That already violated the law. The reality, in one of the other many ways we haven't mentioned. In this case, if they're home, if they're the president, none of those are legal targets in the context of war, but that's what they're doing. Oh, and let's not forget, as Hegseth told you, rules of engagement, pshaw. We don't care about those. Yeah, exactly. Do not allow Israel to further poison the foundations of international law, he writes. Now, you don't have to advocate for global order or international law to understand that what they're doing is wrong. That's a trap. I think it's been created. You know my opinions. I think in many ways we're trying to very clearly expose the new globalist agenda, but the point nonetheless is where we are, and that is against the law. So it's important to highlight that, right? Pointing to the reality, the current static issue does not mean support, right? It can. Authorization for use of military force against Iraq, resolution of 2002. Now, this is important because of how this has been applied, and that Bush did ultimately gain this. And this is why this was a my opinion is that most of these things are illegal and unconstitutional, regardless of how, that they write down something that gives them the ability. But my point is that this, from within the circumstances we claim are the reality, then that is legal. That's not what they did today. The authorization for use of military force against Iraq resolution of 2002 was a joint resolution passed by the United States Congress in October 2002. It was repealed, interestingly, by the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2026. That just happened. Now, my mind, and so it's hard to say for sure, but my opinion is that this was something they wouldn't have wanted to remove because it gave them at least the arguable justification to continue to bomb Iraq and Iran. And it got forced in essentially with like a rider, or whatever you want to call it, where because it was the National Defense Authorization Act, and they had to pass that to fund the year. There's people in Congress that made that go in, and it's been there for a while. Biden seemed to say he supported it because what it does, it gives them this never-ending authorization, that mission creep beyond Iraq, which has been everything. Interestingly, that's no longer the reality. I'm going to go into why that's important. But my point would be that if they did remove this, it means something like the argument is they don't think they need the justification. And that makes sense of what we just read. But it might just be that there's somebody, a Massey type, that just recognized why this was bad and forced them to put it in. And Trump clearly needed this to pass. And so that was something they probably just get, screw it, we'll do it anyway. Because we don't follow the law anyway, do we? I think that was it on here. Just to show the main point. And then here's the actual bill, authorization for use of military force, in case you wanted to read further on that and understand that this was, this is something that we need to consider with Trump's actions today. And understanding, he said we attacked first, this or congressional authorization are the only two options on the table. So they're already breaking the law. Now, the votes in regard to this in 2002, the repealing of it in the National Defense Authorization Act, 296 to 133. Oh, no, I'm sorry. This was the wrong one. This was about in the past. Either way, the bottom line about the 2002 part was the authorization served as the legal basis for the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in 2003, rather than a formal declaration of war. But both those things apply. That's the reality. Note that while Bush sought and obtained this congressional approval, even then, by the way, he argued that the president had independent constitutional authority as commander-in-chief and without it, could act without it was necessary. However, he pursued it anyway. You see, that was already building, guys. If you thought that, then why would you do it anyway? Because you could argue you're trying to appease the international community. Well, there's some logic to that too, in the sense of just demonstrating that you're not belligerent to the rest of the world. But the point is that that's where this became, it grew over the years. And now Trump's just going, well, Article 2, I can do what I want. It's not true. For context, the invasion did not have explicit United Nations Security Council approval for the use of force, which led some to call it illegal under international law. Now, here is Just Security 2024. A presidential proclamation to end the Iraq war. Unilateral executive action to defang a zombie authorization for use of military force. Now, a point to add to this, by the way, is that since this has been removed, which you'll see right here, what they're doing in Iraq is illegal. By the way, it was to begin with. But now they arguably don't even have the legal justification to continue to occupy Iraq. But guess what, guys? They need Iraq desperately for what they're doing. They need Iraq and Syria to maintain the supply lines for what they're doing in Iran and what will come, more importantly, which I think anyway. And so here, this, because of the NDAA 2026, you could argue that this is something that they have been, that's why I'm leaning more towards sort of forced to do, but don't care. It says such action would finally nullify the power of the outdated 2002 war authorization for that conflict. And you can't believe it's 2026. Think about that. 24 years, this temporary authorization has maintained that. And listen to Trump tell you, it'll be a couple of weeks. That's what they said about Iraq. 24 years. It says the authorization for the conflict and safeguard against its future abuse, including as a basis for war with Iran. Because that's what it was being pointed to, because Iran was involved with 9/11. No, they were not. And that's been proven 100 times over. Even New York Times wrote an article about it. But a couple other parts here. And mainly about that, authorization for Iraq and Iran and how this is now removed. The Trump administration also invoked the 2002 resolution as a statutory basis for the killing of Soleimani. Right? So this is how they were using this, right? We killed him because we claimed he relied, it says Trump relied in part, the legal justification for the operation remains heavily redacted, of course, on the theory that the 2002 law theory provided continuing authority to, quote, establish a stable democratic Iraq and address terrorist threats emerging in Iraq. That's what they used. Think about that. So it had to be Iraq. That was the point. And so they said, hey, let's make a deal. Come meet us in Iraq. He flew into the Iraq airport and they bombed him in the Iraq airport. This is who we're dealing with. And even if this guy was a monster, which he was not, that would still be ridiculous. But what they did was to a person who was very respected. I mean, the world around, quite frankly, Iran in particular, and they turned him into a terrorist because he dared to defend against their illegal actions. You feel free to look into this stuff if you care, guys. I mean, I've talked about this stuff extensively. I did an interview with James Corbett back when that first happened about Soleimani. It's just obvious it was then. So what we're talking about is the use of that to bomb him illegally because they establish a stable, and they basically argue that because he was there, he was destabilizing Iraq. That's how flimsy this is. Even though they invited him there, guys. Now it says from 2021 to 2023, the administration cited Article 2 of the Constitution as the sole authority for periodic U.S. airstrikes against so-called Iran-backed militias. And there we go. So they just transitioned away already before we got to this removal of these, because they, this is the point where you might think, that's why I'm considered both, that this was a plan to ultimately fold this in and just start doing it, even in 2023 under Biden, because guess what? They're all the same. Create the justification to just use, I guess, the power that you're in charge. That's what they're actually arguing. Paramilitaries in Iraq and Syria blamed for attacking U.S. forces in those countries. And those like the PMU, which, by the way, were groups that are, arguably still to this point, well, it depends on how much is actually being exchanged between U.S. and Iraq, which I think is very little. Who knows? But at one point, while they were fighting them, they were still being armed by Iraq, who was being armed by the United States government. Easily provable. And so you're basically arming them to then fight them to claim you're bombing Iran. That wasn't the reality. This is just so crazy how all this goes. And so here, they again, back to the point, they used Article 2 in 2023 under Biden to argue they could just do what they wanted, even though they technically still had the authorization of use of military force. It says, but as frequent U.S. airstrikes against these Iran-backed groups persisted, and the 60-day deadline imposed by the War Powers Resolution approached in late 2023, the Biden administration shifted legal rationales, because basically what we're talking about here, which I still argue is a ridiculous point because they didn't have an imminent threat. But you see, it's the same thing. Biden, Trump, whatever. That what they did was abuse the War Powers Act to argue they had 60 days to flush it out, even though they didn't prove that was actually an imminent threat. You see how this works? But so now you're meeting this deadline for 60 days, not 90, like a bunch of morons online are saying. The 90 comes into play when you get possibly an extra 30 days because you convince Congress you need that to remove the troops. But it says, the administration reported to Congress that both the 2002 and the 2001 war authorizations provide authority for these hostilities, right? So you're just playing both cards. Thus, while the White House could continue with strikes even in the absence of fresh authorization. So why did you do it anyway? Because you're going through the motions to make it appear like you're going, but you know what you're doing is illegal. There was no imminent threat, but here's our 48-hour thing. We claim we're doing something. Give us 60 days. Then the 60 days passes, and they go, well, but whatever, we could do this anyway because those authorizations, they're still there. Okay, I honestly think that was about setting up the point to justify what Trump is doing, because they didn't need to do that. They could have just said the authorizations right there, and everyone's acknowledged that and let it go, even though it's not, I don't think, accurate. But yet they did it and then went to the authorizations, setting the precedent for that reality. Article 2. So and that's not the first example, but I think that's important timing. So like the Obama administration, they write the Biden White House is now invoking, and this is written in 2024. The Biden White House is now invoking the 2002 authorization for use of military force as a source of subsidiary authority for military operations in Iraq and Syria. Addressing this outdated Iraq war authorization is thus more than a matter of mere legislative hygiene. The 2002 Iraq authorization for use of military force, the AUMF, remains susceptible to future abuse. Yep, it was right up until the moment it was removed. And still they don't seem to care, specifically as purported authority to attack Iran and Iran-backed groups. Republican senators opposed to repealing the authorization explicitly emphasized the need to retain the Iraq authorization, not in order to achieve objectives specified by the resolution, of course not, but in order to fight Iran without going to Congress. Make sure you hear that. The argument that they discussed among themselves was the reality that we need to keep this because that's the only way we're going to get to go to war with Iran without justification. You have to understand, they know that they're breaking the law. They know what they're doing, and they're just hoping that we don't push it. And that's in case you missed it, that's both sides of that is your government as a whole. Human Rights Watch, to make sure we get into legal reality yet again. The Israeli army comes out and literally tells you what they're doing. And these are crimes, guys. It says the IDF warns representatives of the Iranian regime who remain in Lebanon. You see how this works? That's their effort to justify illegally bombing Lebanon and invading, apparently, and telling them they have to evacuate. But no, they'll pretend that's not what's happening. What they're doing is saying, we think Iran bad guy. And that's just exactly what the U.S. government's been doing our entire lives. That's the mission creep. That's what they did. They argued, ISIS or Al-Qaeda, and they might be there and over there, and then they just invade whatever they want. Aside from the fact that they literally work with those groups, the reality. Earlier today, and so the bottom line is that they claim that's what's happening. Here's Human Rights Watch. The laws of war strictly prohibit attacks targeting civilians, which, by the way, important to hear this, include officials from other countries who are not directly participating in hostilities. That right now what you're going to get is the people who act like Hegseth and Trump going, no rules of engagement. They're going to call you weak. They're going to call you, a Democrat or whatever they want to frame it as. This is the reality, guys. This is the law, and it's always been. You could disagree with it, sure. But what they're doing right now is not claiming it. They're just refusing to acknowledge it. Because Israel wants to assassinate who they want to assassinate. So it doesn't matter whether you're sitting with your 6-month-old baby in your home, they'll bomb you because they just told you they would. Doesn't matter where you are or where you reside. And they're telling you right now. So suddenly you're in Lebanon. Well, you're not in the field of war that justifies the attack, even though hypothetically, if you had a legal attack going on, which is important. And they're just going, we're going to bomb them wherever they are. And every group withstanding is telling you what they're doing is a crime. Well, guess what? They said the same thing about Israel and Gaza, and it's still happening. The suggestion that Israeli forces will target Iranian government officials who do not leave Lebanon is both deeply disturbing and as an admission of an intent to commit a war crime. But guess what? The U.S. government will still support them. The Hegseth reports Iran regime is paying for their crimes against America in blood. I mean, can we not just stand back and realize this is pushing the envelope? This is what we're talking about. Okay, so we have to understand what war is. And that's what the Human Rights Watch was pointing out. At least what we pretended this was. And that's important too, because I'm not naive. I understand that these things are very different in the real world sense, and that most of them actually don't care about them. Most of this stuff in regard to the guidelines, or rather the guardrails. Is that ultimately what we've always discussed is that war we're forced into it. It's a forlorn hero. It's a necessity. We have to save people or to fight back the bad guys, right? War has never been argued to be punitive, that they deserve it. It's because we were giving it back to them, even though we know that's always been a guiding force for the weakest among them in the room. But the reality is they've never said that out loud. And so for you to go and say we're paying them for their crimes, well, you're bombing in civilian locations. So either that means that you're saying all of Iran is paying for those crimes, or because you are actually fighting all of Iran, and even Israel's deliberately bombing them, including the school you basically admitted you bombed. But again, the real point here is that you're admitting that what you're doing is about vitriol. It's about vengeance. And guys, that's a crime. Period. On top of the other arguments, and people will make this argument. They just don't care. And Hegseth is out there doing this. I think he's being driven to do it. No rules of engagement. How are you possibly going to say that? That's an admission of guilt, guys. Again, even if you go, well, I don't care, those things shouldn't exist. Okay, maybe you can make your argument. I'll debate it with you. We can discuss it. But at the moment, that's the current reality to which the U.S. government is literally signed, right? That's the UN charter. You can't just pretend it doesn't exist. They're breaking the law. And guess what? We'll point to Iran every time they even, fake an attempt or whatever you want to call it. They're not actually doing it, but they'll go, Iran violated the ceasefire. Iran violated this charter or this resolution, but then ignore it, or UN is Hamas, right? Well, here's Tucker Carlson speaking with Piers Morgan. And I think this is interesting for a couple of reasons. I'll let it play out. I might stop it, but I'll let it play before I give commentary. Interesting for many reasons.
Where Donald Trump decided to attack Iran. What did you feel about that? Given that it ended so apparently quickly, do you think Trump was vindicated in his short, sharp strategy there?
Oh, well, I will stop for this point, then I'll let it play. This is weird to me. When I looked into this, what I'm being told is this is a new clip, right? But I that can't be the case unless Piers Morgan is genuinely arguing right now that Iran has already stopped. Somehow it's a quick end. I believe that's being misattributed, and it's actually from the 12-day point afterward. But you decide for yourself. Either way, it's the same point. You'll see what I mean. It's really just about the way we're engaging with Iran. But that's strange, isn't it? Whatever you ask, you'll find that their argument, at least when I was looking into this, from reports, people sharing it, that this is a new clip that this came out. I wasn't able to find the actual interview, which I'm sure we could eventually, but listen again, you'll see what I mean. I'm just like, if this is new, I can't believe he just argued that. I'm thinking it's just repackaged old clip from the previous one being shared today.
Where Donald Trump decided to attack Iran. What did you feel about that?
Oh, hold on, right here.
Where Donald Trump decided to attack Iran. What did you feel about that? Given that it ended so apparently quickly, do you think Trump was vindicated in his short, sharp strategy there by bombing Iran? Or do you think that this will come back and haunt him down the line?
Well, it wasn't legal.
Well, of course I can't say. I mean, my life is a kind of unbroken chain of bad predictions and embarrassing analysis, and I've been wrong so many times, and I will be in the future without question. However, it's just a fact that events have consequences that we can't foresee, often for years or generations, and I think it's very unwise.
Like the invasion of Iraq leading to what they claim is the Iran issue, right? Whenever you think about Iran, that's the argument they make, that this has led to that problem becoming a problem, or any number of points where they create the kickback or the vacuum that leads to what they or Afghanistan's the best argument, even though there's more to that story. That ultimately they armed and funded the very groups that they used against the Soviet Union, which became Al-Qaeda. But I think it's clearly, we can see today, this has been a design. And maybe it started organically and they just decided to use it later. Same kind of point though, right? They create the things they later point to.
In the future, without question. However, it's just a fact that events have consequences that we can't foresee, often for years or generations. And I think it's very unwise to use military force without a clear, achievable objective that serves the American national interest. In fact, it's not allowed to use it under any other circumstances. And in that case, I was concerned and remain concerned that this focus on Iran is not actually connected to our national security. How many Shiite terror attacks have there been in the United States in my lifetime? Let me do the math. 0. So don't tell me that.
And in case you missed the point, if you want to make this about Saudi Arabia, well, that would be the Sunni point. That's the Wahhabi version of that. That's 9/11, or at least what they claim, right? Not to get into that. You guys know the reality, but that's the point he was kind of insinuating, right? And that's interesting. Why make it about the other side? Well, because that's the side Israel's fighting. It really is that simple, guys.
The greatest threat we face is Iran. That's a lie. You're telling it on behalf of a foreign power. Maybe they feel the greatest threat they face is Iran. It's not the greatest threat we face. It's not an endorsement of Iran, okay? Doesn't make me a simp for the Shiites. It just makes me an American who's trying to think clearly about what our problems are. And our problems would include tens of millions of foreign nationals living illegally in my country. Nobody knows their identities. They would include a collapsing economy that makes it very hard for my children to have children and live the life that they grew up with and their friends and all American kids. It would include a drug crisis that's killed millions of Americans over the past 20 millions of Americans over the last 20 years. Iran is not even in the top 10 list. So you can scream at me all you want and call me names and call me a bigot or whatever, but there's no evidence to support that. And so if the energy of the U.S. government is focused on a threat that's not the primary threat to us, it is by definition ignoring threats that are. And that's a kind of negligence. And so I pointed that out. I was, roundly attacked. My family was attacked. Whatever. I don't care. It's true. And everyone kind of knows it's true. And being bullied by Ben Shapiro into pretending that it's not true, it's just not on the program for me at 56. I'm just not doing that anymore.
Now, I agree with him. But what's interesting to me is it's essentially, we've gotten to the place essentially where Tucker Carlson is now saying what I've always been saying. And it's so good. I agree. But we should genuinely hope that maybe he just is doing the right thing for the right reasons. We question me and him always. Never stop doing that. Either one of us could be deceiving you or lying to you the entire time. Either one of us could be wrong or misfed information. The point is interesting to me, though, that, yeah, everyone sees it. They always have. And we're just being gaslit about it. And the truth is that, it's like we have been giving even before the last selection process, the 2024, 25 point to 2026, these people were telling you to side with the team. All of them were. Now, that doesn't mean you should ignore what he just said, but recognize that. Or as people point out with, like right now, we talk about this in AM Wake Up. Dave Smith, is, I think, doing a great job calling all this out. But as Steve rightly points out, or Derek, I forget which one did it, he was the one out there telling you to support this. Now, whether genuine now or not, and I think he's owned that to some degree. Who knows? You can decide that that's important to recognize that that was a time where, and we've all made mistakes, right? We've all made the wrong, and he's owned that. I regret doing that. He's a traitor, but it's still important to see that. And then genuinely question whether this is not honest now, right? I don't have any reason to think that in this case. You should question it. But with Tucker, right, what he's saying there is important to hear, because I want you to understand what we've been trying to tell you is a very real point and has been, is at the highest level of the conversation, whatever you think that means, people see it. He's calling it out. So recognize that, demonstrating our value. We've been telling you this well before this became something the right was forced to acknowledge. Now, to his point, guys, this is really important to understand. We're being gaslit into this for Israel. That's not a secret. That's not some kind of a misrepresenting what Marco Rubio said. The evidence has been there my entire life. And what we're seeing at this level is that we're acknowledging that Marco Rubio accidentally, or for whatever by design, tells you that Israel was doing this. We were forced to act. They're just basically trying to slowly walk out this reality and almost, I think, make it just sort of the reality without saying that. Either way, I'm very glad to see that being called out. And I will share, like I said, from anybody. In fact, I'm going to make a point in a minute. I forget if maybe I've already passed it. I forget, but I don't think so. About Michael Tracy. A spectacular fool today with what he's been doing. But if he said something I agreed with, I would probably hesitate to speak up, but I would share it if it was a well-made point. And I think that's important, and we should always do that, because it's not about the person necessarily, it's about the content. And as Furkan writes, oh my God, Tucker Carlson literally cooked Trump and Piers Morgan brutally. And they hate him for it. Oh, I'm glad I just remembered that, because as he was saying in there, a point that I haven't gotten into that I do think is very interesting and relevant, just in an always kind of sense, based on the aftermath of what they do. Let's just say this goes the way it always has in the past, where they blow the country up, kill everyone they can, claim this freedom, claim they're supported. It never is the case. And then basically break down the country to its pieces, sell it off the highest bidder, and leave it into a kind of chaotic situation where they claim someone's in charge and they just reap the benefits forever. That's what every one of these countries are doing it. Every one of them. The point is, if that goes that route, what'll happen to the people? Well, what you're going to see, without question, because it's going to be chaotic, is a ton of immigration or emigration, whatever the correct point. There are going to be people that flee in other countries, and that will inevitably end up in Europe and the United and everywhere else, right? And then what are they going to do? Like they've done every time before. You'll get 40 seconds later, people going, oh my God, it's a foreign invasion and blah, blah. You guys literally did this. They did it in South America. They did it. Every one of these points, you can prove that their actions caused it, and they turn around and use their acts, what they've caused, to justify their next step. It's devious.
This starts, and it's really fascinating to go back. It starts. I
don't know. I don't even know how I bumped that. Sorry about that. So continuing. Next segment here, and this gets into some. There's a bunch of points around this I want to make, and this is. Hold on. Oh, whoa, okay, I'm realizing I just lost something here, I think. Hold on a second. Hope I didn't just close that. I can find it, though. I know exactly what it was. That's crazy. How did that happen? Hold on, let me grab this. I want to start with this and then go through. Hold on one second. There was a response. Damn. All right, let me get it for my, give me 1 second. Maybe I should have played that clip. It was something I want to use to make a point, and it's a post that I think is really well done. I do disagree with one of the points, and I said that, and it's propaganda and co. Oh, nice. Well, he just responded, by the way. It looks like we might be doing a live stream coming up soon. I just said, hey, reach out. I'll show you what I mean. Let me grab it for you right now. And the point is simply about a really well put together sort of assessment of what they see happening and what it sort of is inevitably leading to. And a large part of it comes down to the point about weapons and using them and kind of wasting through their response, setting themselves up for failure. It's gotta be, there we go. Why would that not show up? Okay, here we go. this, and you'll see why I think this is just well done. And I also, shout them out. I think they do good work. Because remember, Propaganda & Co. was one very, very much so calling out the Israeli lies very early, at a time when it was, as Steve puts it, the difficult, not the easy difficult. So, as they write, this is what I was saying. I just said, hey, great assessment. I agree almost entirely, all except the claims of nukes. And I said, but if you want to talk more, let's connect. And they said, no, let's do it. So, I very much appreciate that. That people can have disagreements, but not just immediately hate each other, right? It's like, and I think that's clear based on the work. I think it's objective. But the point is, they wrote, first of all, this is from Hegseth. He's saying the war with Iran could last up to 8 weeks, saying the U.S. and Israel expect to have achieved uncontested airspace. Well, first off, it was very roundly discussed well before we got here that was going to be a very quick point, that's almost inevitable. And that Iran has already factored that in, that they would ultimately end up gaining control of the airspace very quickly. It was not some kind of massive monumental achievement because it was already, and you can go back and look, there's been people discussing this building for a while. And a lot of the analysts and people that are like military minds are saying, well, that was going to be happening immediately. And so it's, of course, they use it to go, we are the best, even though it was kind of expected. But 8 weeks. Well, why do you think that is? Because it's exactly where they have the timeline. It's just ridiculous. Well, let's be clear again, they're doing this illegally. They told you they acted first, so there is no imminent threat. Therefore, there is not a war powers allowance giving them 60 days. Not. But like with Biden and everyone else, they did the same thing, even though it's illegal. So here we are. So now they claim they have 60 days, even though it's illegal. Another 30 should they argue they would want to remove them, and that would take more time. That would be the 90 days. But suddenly it goes to 8 weeks, which was 4 before, right? Well, because 8 weeks is perfectly what they legally argue they have. I just think it's interesting, isn't it? What a perfect coincidence. And then ultimately we'll get it done in 8 weeks, which I doubt that's actually the case, but it's just an interesting point that it perfectly aligns with what they claim they legally have allowed to continue. Just funny to me. Now, here's what they said. Now it's 8-week mission. It'll be 12 weeks by next week. Hegseth brags about establishing air superiority as if that wasn't always going to happen. Like it's Steph Curry bragging that he's made the most threes in a game. Everyone was expecting it. The U.S. was always going to establish air dominance over Iran. For this reason, Iran only had the first 2 days, and this is all his assessment, by the way, to make that clear, to unleash a massive wave of missiles before the U.S. would take over the skies and start hunting the missiles. Now, I do agree. Again, the argument, there's different opinions, but the argument was pretty clearly out there, and that ultimately, if Iran thought that, at the very least, or knew that they would know that they had a window to ultimately make the situation in their favor. And it says, during this short window, Iran needed to exhaust interceptor supplies from the United States and Israel and eliminate key radars that help track and intercept their missiles. Colonel Douglas McGregor already argued that they took their eyes out, and I'll show you what he means by that. And I'm talking about Iran against the U.S. and Israel. Iran succeeded in both of these objectives, he writes. The entire region has burned through interceptors, meaning they've used them all. In a lot of cases, we're being told to stop things like drones that are like $20,000 versus millions for what they're using. And again, that's our money they're using, by the way, both for Israel and the United States. They will not replace them quickly, he writes, and must now face the next few months struggling to intercept Iranian missiles and drones targeting the Strait of Hormuz. And by destroying or damaging radars, Iran has increased the chances of their missiles slipping through. Now that the 2-day window is closed, they are pivoting to a long war of attrition, Iran. And just like the 12-day war, Iran has reduced its missile launches, but will still deliver them over time for the long war of attrition. And this is why we laugh when you get the people that come out like day one and argue we already won. It's a success. Trump already caused peace. It's embarrassing. Even if it was possible, that's not what's already happened. We're in the midst of it. It's propaganda. It says this is in regard to it says this isn't happening because the U.S. destroyed their missiles this isn't happening because the U.S. destroyed Iranian missiles or their launchers in regard to them kind of slowing down, which is what they're claiming. It's happening because Iran is saving them for the long haul. Again, his opinion, but I agree. I think this is a very well put together assessment. America will establish air dominance, but they can't keep their refuelers and fighter jets flying over all of Iran to bomb it left and right forever. Right? At some point, they're gonna, and this is one of the many reasons why they need these kind of supply lines too, and more so for the ground stuff. The U.S. isn't just low on interceptors; they're also low on JDAMs. So there will be a shortage of key offensive weapons as well. And that's been argued by almost everybody. So the U.S. hasn't destroyed Iran's missile supplies, nor their ability to launch them. And they likely won't be able to at all. And we'll get to some examples of why that seems interestingly the case with one of these discussion points where, did I lose it already? I'll come back to it. It's basically showing them firing from places that they argue are undetectable. And it says, so the U.S. hasn't destroyed their missile supplies nor their ability to launch them, and they likely won't be able to. This is why Trump hurriedly tried to recruit the Kurds to fight for them. Also, by the way, why he offered a ceasefire through his Italian contacts and reportedly from Israeli media, Iran flatly denied it. That's crazy when you think about what's happening with what they're afraid. If Iran was already losing, they wouldn't have denied that. So it goes on to say, and the Kurds we'll get to, that's a super important point. That's an illegal invasion of its own right. They need proxies to try and break Iran in the long run by occupying territory. It says, so far, no one seems able or willing. And this is before the today point. And the population that supposedly hated the government has remained loyal, obviously, because they were lying about what's going on there. To keep Hormuz closed, which I want to get into that again, technically not closed, but we'll get into that same point about what is happening, because you can see yet again that there's ships, even U.S. ships on the inside. So if this was, if they're arguing they were going to be bombing anybody that came through, how are there U.S. ships within that? But we'll come back to it. The reality is there's a lot of ships still there. But the main point is that it is reduced. So that's right now, by the way. We'll come back to it. The argument is that it's apparently like they're claiming 94% reduced. I don't know how you would tell that by looking at it, but it's hard. It looks like there are ships. That's why I've always said if it was shut down, that wouldn't be the case. But it's more so restricted is the right way to frame it, if that's accurate. So he says, but to keep whatever they're doing going, Iran doesn't need massive waves. They just need to fire 1 or 2 missiles a day. It's a good point, right? Because the threat, even like we can see right now, just the sentiment, the idea that they will stop you, even though it doesn't seem to be happening to everybody, is enough to slow it down by apparently 94%. So they just need to make the threat, fire a couple of missiles here and there. And if one of those missiles hit an oil facility, it will be disastrous, he writes. And as we are now seeing, they have the ability to launch missiles from underground. So Iran is guaranteed to still get them off. The oil facility part of it is obviously in their mind, like if they did that, it would obviously cause a lot of negative attention to them from other countries they hurt by doing that, but it would very clearly put them in a bad position and put Iran probably in a better one. And it says, and if continuing, it says, so the Gulf countries will take a massive hit to their oil and gas revenues throughout this entire 8-week process. And I get the sense it's going to go longer than that, guys. And by now, and look, if you want to be real about this, it has for a long time. Whether if you just because we have these lulls in between their regime change efforts, they never stopped. They've always been building what they're trying to do to Iran. So the reality is it's ongoing. So if they just pause after 8 weeks, the agenda doesn't stop. But it says, and by the way, another reason for the reduction in missile waves is the fact that the military is operating in decentralized nodes. They have their orders and their targets. They will attack when they choose to. The only real winner in this situation is Israel, right? Because their goal was never really regime change, but a weakening of Iran. Well, I argue it's both, but I would argue it's more so because they're getting the U.S. to do it for them, like they have. Now, Israel's launching missiles, but what we're seeing largely is the U.S. people at risk. And we'll get to that in a second. People are arguing there's been 650 U.S. service members killed. The U.S. denies it, but there's evidence that seems to suggest, sort of like the Iraq point in the back before, when they're like 70 brain injuries. And it's like, there's no way they caused 70 brain injuries, but no one died. That was the people that survived, right? The point is that they're hiding this. But so clearly Israel is benefiting because this is what they've wanted, but also if and when, and I think it's already happening, there is a ground part of this. Do you think Israel's going to invade? No, that's not going to happen, guys. It's going to be U.S. troops. And it says they have achieved this, but not without dragging the U.S. into a quagmire and effing over the Gulf countries in the process. And Saudi Arabia came up early and said, the U.S. has abandoned us. They're using all the defenses to help Israel, and we're getting bombed. This is an all or nothing game for them, Israel or nothing. And that's because I don't think they have a choice. But Iran still has highly enriched uranium, he writes, which is, well, 60% is the argument. That's the claim directly from the International Atomic Energy Agency, which, by the way, was what was allowed. It's within their safeguards. I'll show you yet again the lie from Witkoff. But he says they still have enriched uranium, and he says they can drop 20 nukes on Israel at any moment. That's where I disagree. But look, there's arguments out there and people that claim there's evidence, and maybe I'm wrong, right? I mean, I'm always okay having a discussion about these things if people are coming at it from an amicable way, and we're willing to, that's what this will be, and I appreciate that. And so I think what's important is that we are able to do that with each other, like in the IMA, for example. Like, not all of us agree on everything, right? And we have to be able to be like, hey, like, this is what I think, and evolve our opinions. I just think it's very clear, and we could talk about this, that the evidence we have, not that it's not there or not possible. Maybe they have them and we can't prove that. That's just as likely, but that ultimately the evidence doesn't back it up. And I think that's pretty clear. It says, so this is ugly and painful for Iran, but it isn't over. Remember, the U.S. went to war with the Houthis for 8 weeks. and as he writes, what happened? They literally still control the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. They effectively reduced their shipments incredibly, and they didn't even need to they didn't need to kill anybody. They didn't steal anything. They didn't sink a single ship. But they sure as hell used munitions because they were using restraint, and they called them terrorists for it, as they were raping people and killing children, right? Because clearly. Oh, this was just yeah, that's right. And so going forward, keeping all that in mind, right? Robert A. Page points to an article from The Hill. Hegseth, Kane preview major gravity bombing campaign. Now, maybe you argue they're just using new munitions. I mean, Israel does it every time to try to test new things on people that are, they're taking advantage of. But he says, when Secretary Hegseth says the U.S. shifting to gravity bombs, this means we are running out of precision munitions, which is exactly what seems to be the case. He says the smart bomb trap is transforming into a dumb bomb disaster. He's a professor of political science, University of Chicago, specializing in security affairs. Well, take it for what you will. I think he's right. And this is it's Asian Times. I forget I saw about 3 different articles on this point, and I believe this is the reality because I think they're not stupid. Unlike the United States, Iran, and this is their quote, prepared itself for a long war, according to the security chief himself. But that's exactly what Propaganda Co. was saying, right? They knew this was going to go to this point. They knew the U.S. would be the way that they're all, and they planned for it. And now I think that planning is showing to be the right way to go. So in regard to the Strait of Hormuz, like the point is that they're arguing when the first place was we're threatening that. And that actually had an immediate effect. But as I showed you, there's still clearly ships in the middle on both sides. So it's not shut down, right? Then they put out another claim. I think it was the day next or the 2 days later, and they said they were going to set on fire or something like that, probably bomb ships that were going through. And that I still have yet to see that happen, because that would be a huge jump, huge. Even with what we're dealing with, because they would use it that way, right? But so then reports come out that 94% of the traffic has been shut down. I just don't understand. It's weird to me that we can, and this again is a real-time map of how we can see it all and then still not, like, that just doesn't make sense to me. But maybe that's just a representation of what the 6% that's left. I don't know. I mean, I'm not watch this map every day. But something about this feels off to me, right? And my worry is that there's something bigger going on. Like we always should ask. That everyone's lying to us. I don't know. It just seems strange. So keep it all in mind. But remember that they obviously have the ability to shut this down. And we're talking about the internet, the waters of Iran. It's like it's the same point of claiming that the U.S. wouldn't shut down the Gulf of Mexico, right? Like the idea, even though Mexico is right there and has just as much right to the territory, that the U.S., what they've done effectively before, wouldn't just shut down their access to it because they decide to, right? So the idea that they're somehow not allowed, and I would argue realistically, none of them should be allowed to stop any free movement, frankly, but that they do it over there. And so at the end of the day, happening here is it makes them hypocritical. Same point as before. I argue none of them should be doing it. But Iran is in a position where they recognize the only thing they can do, if that has to come to pass, is effectively use that as a coercive tool. But recognize they haven't technically done it yet, which I think speaks volumes. How this ends up will ultimately be the main point. Oh, and even just as I was searching for this to see the articles, here's what the random Brave thing wrote. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed. So that makes my point right there. That's not like there's not ships blocking it, but it's effectively closed through though not formally declared closed, right? And so when we go in and, like I discussed, it breaks down those same points. They say this is closed. If anyone tries to pass, they will. That's what it is right there. They'll set the ships ablaze. Well, okay. Well, clearly that's not the case, and that's anybody's right there, right? I think what the point was, if it's all the way it looks, is that they're saying that to make the threat to have that just be the reaction while not actually doing it because those consequences would be real. But they're still using it. They're still saying they shut it down because people are they're taking the choice to not go through. But this is even what the New Arab wrote. After Iran threats and U.S. pondering, is the Strait of Hormuz closed? And it says, through traffic at the Strait of Hormuz, the world's most critical oil checkpoint has come to a near complete standstill. Following Iran's declaration of the closure of the passageway, marine tracking has shown. It says real-time open source traffic data shows transits have plummeted to near zero. So I guess also alternatively, that those ships could all just be kind of sitting there, but that doesn't seem to be what translates from day to day. But I still think that the U.S. ship, as we just showed you, is on the inside of that. How does that make sense? I don't know. I guess maybe because they're docking on the other side of the landmass. Maybe that's possible, right? And they just come out like that would make sense. But either way, the point is just question it because something seems a little bit odd about it. Now here is Alex Jones coming out and saying Trump has signed an executive emergency order for war if anyone tries to close the Strait of Hormuz. Then you watch the clip. He's just like, I knew it. I called it. I told you it was going to happen. And here's the thing. And what does he point to? Oh, and by the way, here's Night Watch Nate showing you both these guys literally over here going, we need to side with Trump to save us from war with Iran. And here they are going, oh no. You know, it's just hilarious to me. But he's arguing that they signed an executive order. That's what it says right there. He wrote this. Trump has signed an executive order, emergency order for war if anyone tries to close. Okay. Well, what he's pointing to, which I already showed you, is Trump's Truth Social, which simply says that I've ordered the United States. Well, actually, maybe I didn't show this. I forget. I think I might have had it off the side. I forget. Either way, the argument being that he's claiming, or is effective immediately, I've ordered the United States Development Finance Corporation to provide at a very reasonable price political risk insurance and guarantees for the financial security of all maritime trade. Okay. Traveling through the Gulf. That's not just the one location, by the way, but it says this will be available to all shippings if necessary. United States Navy will escort tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. That argument that's not new, by the way. That's been made before. No matter what, the United States will ensure free flow of energy to the world, and and military might, the greatest on the earth. Okay. Well, guess what? He's lying to you or he's stupid, because the reality is there is no signed executive order as far as I can tell. There is a statement on Truth Social of demanding an immediate effective thing. But so why would he claim it like that? Because he won. I don't know the reality, but if you can look it up for yourself. Look up the executive order pages. I've done myself, or you could simply ask the platform that he'll deny. Somebody else did the same thing. Is there any merit to this? No. Trump posted today that they may escort people through if necessary. No signed executive emergency order. Why does he keep doing this? I mean, genuinely, why does he keep doing this? I actually don't understand why you would choose. I mean, the only thing I can come to terms with is either that he doesn't actually know he's wrong, which is crazy, and he's just being fed constant lies from the people that have always given him half-truths, or he knows he's looking stupid and all in to support the team. I actually wasn't going to play it, but here, just listen to the beginning of it, because I just don't understand. Other than the obvious point that it's that what they've always been, And they're just, now it's all that they're being, they're basically, what's the word? Activating. I'm just going, now go out there and do what you've always been doing, and then it just doesn't matter. I don't know, but it's hard to watch.
Said at the first of the show, they're going to use the insurance company shutting down the Strait of Hormuz as the claim that we've got to put a beachhead on the Iranian side so they can't close it to secure it for trade.
And his point was for boots on the ground, right? Except the Kurds are already happening. So that ended up not being the justification for it. But you could argue again for maybe U.S. boots, which, by the way, are already there, if we're being honest. But overall, maybe tomorrow it happens. I say this every time. Maybe tomorrow that actually gets signed, and then that'd be the case. But right now in this moment, he did not. So you can call that a small point, but I actually argue it probably won't even end up that way, because he's been caught like incredibly lying like this many, many times. But the ultimate point is that if it did happen tomorrow, then tomorrow that would be the right. Then they would say they did not sign it today. He simply put a statement out. So I just wonder why you would lie and make yourself look this bad.
Said, I believe that'll be the excuse for boots on the ground, which they floated in the last 2 days, which Eric Prince freaked out about, rightfully. Ladies and gentlemen, he just put this out. Show the timestamp on this, guys. Scroll down.
He's doing a victory lap, even though he's wrong. How funny is that? But overall, guys, this is just the way this has been going for a very long time. It's hard to watch. I just don't get it, you know. But it's been a never-ending reality. This just never stops. And again, you want to look back here, you'll see them doing the same little song and dance. Also, it's worth noting, by the way, and I do think this is interesting because of what Stephanie Seneff had to say about Ozempic. That it's almost, the point would be that you just blow up if you stop taking it, and if you keep taking it, it has dangerous side effects. And so weird, his voice has been bad for weeks and he's gaining weight back. I think there's some relevance to that. Personal opinion. You guys can decide for yourself. And that's what it looks like when you blindly trust an administration to just take whatever. Here, take this methylene blue. Take this new Ozempic. It's all great because we said so. Team sport politics that end up hurting you because you do it yourself. Oh, and then here's ask it to, in case you didn't agree with that one. I asked it. That was yesterday. I asked it again today. No. There is no publicly available executive order, and their statement is that claim seems to be stemmed from exaggerated or misinterpreted social media posts or lying, which amplified Trump's statements into something more dramatic, like an emergency war order. Yeah, that's what their job is, guys. Well, yet again, here's Tim Young. Tim Young has 1.1 million followers. This post itself only has 36,000, just jumped. I want you to think about that, guys, because these people, their own team is not okay with what they're saying right now. That's what I think. He says Iran wasn't close to making nuclear weapons. It wasn't just close, and we showed you this yesterday. The Iranian negotiators bragged that they had enough to make 11 bombs. They did not. It's a lie. I'll show you right now. And I mean, I'll just jump ahead to this point since it makes it even more clear. It's now come out after the fact. Diplomats claim Trump's envoy undermined Iran talks. What a shock. The blind Israel Zionist was lying to us. Oh my gosh. The truth is that he and Kushner were doing this from day one, and they've been caught already more than once. So I'm going to play the clip so you hear it. It's only 50 seconds. And realize that this has been going around all the partisan media, and they state this as fact because Witkoff said it out loud, even though you can prove with source material directly from the IAEA that that's not true. Here's the clip.
Percent materials, Sean, can be brought to 90%. That's weapons grade, in roughly 1 week, maybe 10 days at the outside. The 20% can be brought to weapons grade inside of 3 to 4 weeks. And let me say this because I forgot this small little detail. In that first meeting, both the Iranian negotiators said to us directly, with no shame, that they controlled 460 kilograms of 60%, and they're aware that that could make
no shame because that was legally allowed, and that's what was within the safeguards.
11 nuclear bombs, and that was the beginning of their negotiating stance.
Yeah, which was stating the reality that was allowed.
So that's they were proud of it. They were proud that they had evaded.
You see, that is everything else you could have argued. He was just, he wasn't necessarily lying, but that was him just, they were proud of it. They were like gloating, or what was the other word he said?
They were proud of it. They were proud that they had evaded all sorts of oversight protocols.
Evaded oversight. So he's bald-faced lying. And that's now come out, right? The other diplomats have been like, the guy's just trying to sabotage this. The truth, yet again, here is from June 2025, the International Atomic Energy Agency, like the group in regard to deciding whether or not they're meeting their obligations. And they always did. JCPOA, before Trump pulled out, that was the reality. So here's what they said. And I read through a lot more of it yesterday, and it makes it very clear, one, that what Israel's doing, bombing these locations, puts everybody at risk for potential civilian nuclear programs having a problem. Didn't everybody scream about what was happening in Ukraine and Russia, but now they're bombing deliberately in a 12-day war and was like, oh, good, get them. What? There's no consistency in these ridiculous people. But on top of all of that, it says Fordo is Iran's main enrichment location for enriching uranium to 60%. The agency is not aware of any damage at that location. They're stating it like that, and I'll show you even more, because that's just a static, that's not some shocking point. That's what they already knew was the reality. And what they're saying there is, good, thank God there's no damage for that to potentially be a problem. As stated in my post, he writes, and I believe this was the secretary, the director general of the agency. As stated in my most recent report to the agency's board of governors, and based on inspections conducted at the relevant facilities since then, Iran's uranium stockpiles remain under safeguards in accordance with Iran's comprehensive safeguard agreement. You may recall that more than 400 kilograms, 465 is what he said, of this stockpile is enriched to 60%, which, in case you missed the last sentence, is within their safeguard agreement. So here he comes out and goes, they were bragging about the over 400 and 60%, and they just didn't care. They were violating safeguard regulations. No, they were not. He knows that, and he's playing the dumb people in his audience. And it says, no, I shouldn't even say it like that. The people who are not educated on these points. It is essential that the agency resumes inspections as soon as possible to provide credible assurances that hasn't changed. Because since the 12-day war point, there's been ongoing war fighting, so nobody's been there. The point is, within that time frame, that wouldn't be the case anyway. The reality is they're simply just saying, let's go back to the agreement that Trump and Israel are violating. They didn't say, but that are causing this not to be the reality, because we'll go right back to ensuring that they're not doing what you always say they're doing. And at the end, it says, again, the IAEA can guarantee through their watertight inspection system that nuclear weapons will not be developed in Iran. And yet here he comes out and lies blatantly, because that's what Witkoff is, a liar. And I simply said under Tim Young, who blindly shared this, and he was wrong. Clearly, you all benefit from incessantly lying in the interests of the government on this platform, but they're the rebels fighting the deep state. Well, they support the deep state. Rather, I should say you benefit from repeating whatever the government says, which is almost always a lie. And you just don't seem to care one way or the other. And this person down here rightly points out, journalism before was them going, asking questions of power. Now it's them repeating what power says to the people. It's very real. That's exactly what they've done in the mainstream alternative and mainstream. Now, Ryan Rosbiani reports what Senator, what's his name again? Chris Murphy had to say. Now, what we just talked about from the Propagandico assessment, right, was, and this is what is, again, a lot of these things, especially in the midst of all this, are very difficult to prove. But the assessments from people who are so-called experts in the topic, and admissions from both sides of the conversation in certain ways, seem to suggest that the U.S. has really burned through what they have. Some people arguing why that was necessary, but at the end of the day, that they burned through a lot of it. Propaganda & Co. and others that I've read through are arguing that this is a planned strategy. And remember what Rubio and others had said, that the missiles and drones they have, it was going to get to a level where we wouldn't be able to stop it. Well, I don't know why that becomes a legal argument, because they have things that you can use. It's just ridiculous to me. But what Murphy has to say here is that, and it's sort of what we already were told, that they can't stop these drones that are essentially just killing U.S. servicemen, which begins to make the argument that more people are dying than we actually are told.
Can you give us an
How did I do that? I don't know how I keep doing this. Every day. I somehow miss these clips. Sorry, I shouldn't even bring it up every time. I should just play it off like I didn't even do something wrong, because that would be smooth. Let me see here. While I'm doing this, I laugh at myself because I go through this every time and I do the same thing every time. And I think I have a system where it's absolute that I'm not going to miss something, and I do it all the time. So here is this I'm grabbing from the downloader. Him essentially just telling you that these drones are getting through, which lines up with pretty much everything else we're being told. And also, don't forget that they haven't been doing the briefings. They haven't been talking to the Sunday show. Like, they're not giving you any information. And most everybody's arguing that that's indicative of some kind of a, like they don't know what to say, that they're failing or it's hurt. It rather makes the sense that it adds merit to the claim that there are more people dying than we're being told.
This is as serious as it gets. This is war and peace. They told us in that room that there are going to be more Americans that are going to die, that they are not in the short run going to be able to stop these drones that are going to continue to fly into the Middle East. We have to have a debate in the United States Senate on an authorization of military force. It will likely fail it will likely fail, and we shouldn't be voting to proceed to other pieces of legislation until we get a debate on this deeply unpopular, immoral, and illegal war with Iran.
It's always so funny to watch them stand up against these things, but then never truly follow through with the action, like impeachment or whatever else. By the way, I'm laughing now because I realized now I remember I ended up deciding not to play that. So I plan ahead and then I forget. Laugh at me. But so the point here is that they're claiming these are the U.S. military personnel that were killed, and we're being told that this stuff is just flying through, that they already depleted and all this different stuff. And here's Chris Martenson and others who have been highlighting, which this is I would argue subjective because you can't prove that it means what they think. But I do agree with what it suggests. There's a point that a post that went out. Not a good sign, she writes, that the United States that Dover Air Force Base is, quote, urgently hiring people to sort through the personal effects of dead soldiers. And there's an application for it. And as Chris Martin says, well, seems like a lot of effort for 6 people. So take that for what you will. It's an interesting point. And we know they've hid these things in the past. Now, RT reports that more than 650 U.S. military personnel were killed or wounded by Iran's personnel, according to Iran. Now, how would they know for sure? That's how the game is played every time. They always, one side lies about more, one side lies about less, and it's usually somewhere in the middle. And Daniel McAdams writes, why has the government not provided an update? That's the real question. An account of U.S. service members who were killed or wounded. Why not? So almost always this happens in the past, even if it's a lie, right? Douglas McGregor came out and said satellite imagery confirms massive damage to U.S. Space Force's $1.1 billion ballistic missile early warning radar and cutter. They took out the eyes. He said this on the 3rd. So considering what else we were just talking about and the reality that he's $1.1 billion ballistic missile early warning system, like whether or not you're talking about the fact that they hindered their ability to see what's happening or the fact that they just took out $1 billion system, how do we pretend like this is not becoming obvious? I mean, assuming this is correct. I mean, that's the point to make, because the only reason I would share it like this, seeing as how it's just statement, is because he's a general and I'd argue he has insight, but take a question like you would anything else. In the past, he tends to be citing these things because he has contacts in the military. And what's interesting, and in most cases, they flush out to be correct. The point, though, is that this would be something that would suggest that Iran's not failing like they claim, not floundering and being killed and bombed and everything, but they're more so lying about that. RT points out a Chinese reporter, who was on the ground in Tel Aviv, captured extensive damage in the city and the center from Iranian strikes. But just after 5 minutes of filming, the Israeli security arrived and ordered them to stop. Because it's a free country and it's all about free speech and journalism, right? Well, here's another point to include. CNN detained and their phones accessed by Israel. The Israeli government detains American journalists, or whatever you want to call CNN, and their reporter crew after they were released, and they said that the Israeli authorities were able to access their phones without using a password or Face ID. Right? Thanks, U.S. government. Thanks, Palantir. Thanks, all the different things they've been doing. And that's before, and their Face ID before taping the cameras. And what we keep hearing is that they put things in people's phones. That's been proven. That somebody came back and showed what they put in their phone. Tape was placed over the phone camera of the journalist with numbers written on the tape. That's crazy, guys. So journalism, though, right? Freedom of speech. This is the Israeli government doing what they always do. I'm sorry, and I said American journalists. It looks like it was CNN Turkey, but regardless, journalists. Or again, not even really joking, whatever you want to call the corporate media. But still, there's still whatever. The point is, you are a journalist if you want to be, and you can lie. That's free speech. So the point is, just whether they're lying or dishonest or working for the government, they have the right to go there and do what journalists do. And they're stopping them. Now, Kim.com points out some pretty crazy videos. And from what I can tell, these are genuine. This is Tel Aviv, guys. Take a look at this. Where are their air defenses? I mean, that's crazy. There, some of them, right? But what it looks to me like we're talking like 1 out of 10. So he says Israel lost its air defense. You know my opinion. I don't think they've ever truly had the Iron Dome working like they claim they do. That's my opinion. Eric Dougherty, holy smokes, look at Tehran. And yeah, and that does appear to be also an accurate video. We'll show you that in a second. That's just to show you this, but I'll show you that one in a second. Now, these apparently are also real based on my investigation. But, there's a lot up in the air right now, but this is what I found. Look at this one. Look at that. I don't see anything being stopped right there. I think this is quite a bit different than we're being told. Now, this is especially frustrating for Americans. On the 3rd, yesterday, the U.S. Embassy says it can't evacuate Americans in Israel. Now, there's been an update to that. I haven't seen it flush out yet, but there's been arguments of them saying, we'll do something. We'll figure it out. Because everybody freaked out about this. I believe it was Huckabee, the blind religious Zionist Huckabee, who told you that America should die for Israel, or that we should, that America, everything. That guy's so blatant about his support for Israel over the United States, that ultimately he was the one saying that, we can't do it. And people were outraged. So my point is, regardless of whether they reactively said, wait, we'll find something, they were telling you that you're stuck. We can't help you. And then, this is the same day, White House helps MAGA influencers, including famous dog walker, flee the Middle East war zone on a private jet. You get this, guys? So sorry, Americans, you're stuck. We can't do anything for you because Israel won't let us. But these MAGA influencers will get your private jet. We'll fly you out because, you guys lie for us. Or whatever you want to make sense of it is, that, or make sense of it for it, or whatever, make sense of it. That's crazy to me. It shows you what they care about. Not you, not Americans. Now, last point, two last points in this segment before we mostly finish up. As the Zionism Observer points out, and we showed you this video when this came out. This was a while ago, 2023. What you're looking at, guys, is Ben Gurion Airport. And this was not even denied. They argue like it's okay because we're not terrorists. It also makes that a legal military target. And as Zionism Observer points out, and then of course when they have civilians around it, that makes them using them as human shields. When the inevitable strike on Ben Gurion happens, Western journalists will lie to everyone and tell us this is a civilian airport. This video from October 12th, 2023, and it is of bombs used to massacre families in Gaza. Ben Gurion is a civilian airport. Well, you could argue both, that Israel's allowing it to be a civilian airport, but it's also using it as a military location. So it's Israel's responsibility. Let me see if I have this one. No, it doesn't look like it. All right, so continuing. Daily Sabah says, explosions rock Erbil as Iraq suffers nationwide blackout. Now, we just talked about this, and I think the Iraq part of this, oh, did I lose it? Oh, that's not that long. That's right. Is because I think what we're dealing with right now is that they recognize a threat. That the Iraqi government's never been okay with what's happening, or rather the people and lots of the government. And even then, it's evolved into most of the government too. It's just, remember they tried to vote, they said, you got to leave. And they said, no, we respect your sovereignty, but we won't leave. That's how dumb this is. They occupy them. And so there are groups that are loyal or, that are allies, or you could call them proxies if you want to go with their narrative. I disagree, of in Iraq they claim are Iranian proxies. They're allies, and in many cases you can prove they've not even been connected for a long time. They've, back when it was the discussion of the invasion of Iraq, and there was an overlap. The PMU, the military units or whatever it was, those are the same religious ideology. They bombed them often throughout the years, claiming they were attacking Iran for things they did when there's no real connection in that moment. But I think right now what you're seeing is a global situation. We're seeing places all over the world get rushed because they're protesting what they're doing. Marines just shot people rushing a consulate. You could argue protesting, but I think there's a valid point to discuss rushing a consulate. Like if they're rushing in and I'm not going to say I support shooting people because I don't know the context of it. But overall, people are not okay with what's happening, the world around, and they're starting to feel it. And so what I think is happening is that there's things in Iraq that are rising up as well, and they recognize they need to ensure that Iraq is still theirs for supply chain, for what they're going to be doing in the future. And so I think there's already been bombings in Iraq, and now they're suffering a nationwide blackout today. Like I keep telling you guys, I think this is by design. Now watch as somebody eventually, if they need to, will argue, look at Iraq did this to their people, when I think they did it themselves, rather the U.S. government. Explosions were heard near the international airport on Wednesday in Iraq, grappling with a nationwide power outage and rising security tensions, prompting the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad to urge American civilians to leave the country immediately. Multiple loud blasts were reported, particularly around the airport zone that hosts troops in the U.S. coalition. The city is also home to a major U.S. consulate complex and has seen repeated drone interceptions. Now, this could be in a number of overlapping things, even multiple things. You could even argue that maybe Israel's doing this to justify that, to get U.S. to feel they're under attack. But it could just as easily be Iran bombing these locations because they're legal targets. The incidents came as Iraq's electricity minister announced that the country had suffered complete shutdown of its grid. Authorities said the blackout affected all provinces, and technical teams were working to determine what happened. Officials didn't immediately identify the reason. But it's all been kicking off since this started with Israel and Iran and the United States. We'll see how this develops, guys. I very much think we're watching the global initiation of these agendas, like the Greater Israel Project, for example. Now, the Board of Peace, or rather, the article where I used that, the U.S. Israel illegally bombed Iran, killing over 100 school children discussion. This was from the 28th of February. Minab, the school, the girls' school. Every day it becomes more obvious what happened. Every single day. So you can watch the show. It was obvious then. Drop Site News posts something that I almost can't believe. You don't even need, that's what I had next up. I'll play it real quick since I do have it. Here's what Hegseth was saying in the discussion. Look at the way he responds.
Can you give us an update on what the administration knows, what you know now about the reported strike on a girls' school in southern Iran on Saturday?
All I can say is that we're investigating that. We, of course, never target civilian targets.
I literally went over this in that last show, and yes, they do. It's even frustrating. I think we all know that. He knows that. I can show you countless examples. I talked about the school bus full of children in Yemen, which was a Saudi Arabian attack, but it was U.S. bombs, and they were allies. But then I can show you countless examples of U.S. bombings in Iraq, in Syria. Countless examples, guys, where they're accused and then proven to be bombing these schools. And we're going to get to this one right now where he's lying because it turns out they did, whether by accident or not. And I don't believe that.
But we're taking a look and investigating that. Red time.
So that was what? What's today? Almost a week ago? 5 days? Right? How long does it take to figure out whether you did something? Not whether, the nuance of what did you bomb them or not? Was that your attack or not? They already know. They knew immediately. So watch how he answers. When somebody just follows up and goes, well, what do you know? It's been 5 days.
In front.
Just on the basis that with the information you would have, your reconnaissance abilities, ability to gather information, it's several days on now. So yeah. Is there any clarity on whose munition this was?
We're investigating it. Thank you.
Now, what you're noticing from them, and that was a small example, but he's become really defensive. They all have. Why? Because they know they're being seen, guys. We've all dealt with this. You've all caught somebody doing something and watched the way they all act, like Luna on that talk show, and she gets red and flustered and can't pronounce her words. Yeah, because they know they're looking stupid, guys. Not a secret. So it's quite obvious. We're investigating. Shut up. I just told you. If nothing was going on, that wouldn't be your answer. It would not in that way, in my opinion. The reality, guys, I think, on top of it all, just an actual example of incompetence, or you could argue that this was given to him. Intelligence, because that's, where did that tend to come from in this conversation, and that they were doing it to blame it on them. Now, the reason I even add that is because the Israeli government, rather one of their little weasel assets out there, has already insinuated that it was the U.S. government that did this, and that not to blame Israel. I'll show you next. So keeping that in mind, it's just as likely that somebody, an Israeli entity, gave him this map or gave him the intelligence or whatever to set them up. If you don't think that's possible, you're just not paying attention. But, and just since I said it, we'll come back to it. Here is Elon Levy. The Minab school incident is an extremely tragic story. It seems to be a result of faulty intelligence. Oh, you mean aside from when you guys first said it didn't happen and it was in Afghanistan or Pakistan or whatever you said next? Now, it did happen, but now it's because faulty intelligence. Oopsie, that's always what they do, like clockwork. Because the school was on a site that used to be part of an adjacent military base. Well, that would still make it not a legal target. You monster. as has been argued by every international entity. Adjacent is not the same thing, but it says that was bombed. In any case, Israeli forces weren't active in the area, and CENTCOM is investigating. So you don't dare try to pin this on us. Wow. I mean, guys, that's very clear. We'll come back to it. As Dropsite News writes, right in the middle of the strike map, U.S. War Secretary Pete Hegseth proudly displayed at a Pentagon briefing site sits Minab. Quite literally. That is exactly where it is, and you're even in the red of one of their bombing locations. That's his map. That's what they posted. Where was I? So it says the site of a school in southern Iran where the U.S.-Israeli strike killed 165 children this weekend. BBC's Tom Bateman asked Hegseth whether the Pentagon knows whose munitions hit the school, and Hegseth said the department's still investigating. Journalist Chris Oziek plotted the Minab school, green dot, onto the strike map released by the U.S. military today. It sits within the cluster of U.S. strikes zones shown on the Pentagon briefing map. That's just wild. So we know what's going on here, guys. It's not secret. I mean, every single point in this discussion has already shown this. And on top of the fact that we actually know they bombed those locations before this. We actually knew that because they announced that. We know that they bombed the location and then tried to blame it on Iran because they got their assets to put out a fake image where they claimed it was a missile that shot by Iran. And that turned out to be a fake, or rather an old image with snow in the mountains where there's not where this is. There's just this ongoing game. And then Zachary Foster points out, genocide apologist refers to 150 school children and over 1,000 civilians as trash. If you're confused about what's going on, America and Israel are basically cleaning up the world's trash. And that's welcome to Zionism. Well, and at the same point, this one is a special version of these manipulative people. She says, these son of a bitch has prepared for war with the West for 47 years, right? You see the talking points, all the same thing from every one of them. And on day 4 of the war, they're already hiding in schools. I thought you, quote, love death more than love life. What happened? Oh, look, it's a picture that I guess you could assume is a school, but not be sure. It's just stupid. But even that, guess what? You know what she's doing? She's deliberately taking an image from a press conference that Iran held in the school, even with pictures of the dead children that they killed behind him. Because they're doing that to announce that they did this. They bombed this school, and here we are announcing that, okay, they decamp. This is the elementary school that has already been bombed. It also says a lot about the supporters of the war, that the presence of a foreign minister spokesman at a school would somehow justify bombing it. You see, he's not military. By every law we've always argued we're bound by, international and otherwise, he's a minister. He's the government. He's not a military active person, but they don't care. And Elon Levy says it's the U.S. Don't blame us. And also comes out and gives you, though, well, it was a whoopsie. Well, sort of like, remember, blanking all of a sudden. Dang, that's frustrating. Shireen Abu Akleh. How do you spell that again? Dang it. Oh, well. The point, Derek did a great work on this. The reality of that was that there was she was a journalist that got shot, and that the Israeli government lied. They came out and said, no, it was Hamas. And that got proven to be false. And they said, oh, it looks like it was a ricochet. That turned out to be false. Then, I think there was even another element. And then eventually it was like, well, we did it, but it was a mistake. And I'm not making this up. It was like a week and a half. And that's where it came down to. And so ultimately, just lied until you got that, accepted what they said. I thought that's how you spelled it. Yeah, right there. Let's see if that pops up. This would be a good article to include regardless, because it shows, I guess not. Well, look it up later. Give me the link in the chat if you guys know what I'm talking about. So the idea being that it turned all the way in eventually to it was faulty intelligence, but blame the United States government. So after all of this, with what they're doing for them, they still have the nerve to come around and say, but it was their fault, blame them. Because that's always what this is. America first, right? Hey, Israel supporters, one of Israel's assets just publicly admitted the school was indeed bombed, as you all have been told to lie about it, and then claim the U.S. government was responsible for the bombing alone and not to blame Israel. Greatest ally indeed. Even the UN came out and said that the bombing of this school, UNESCO says the bombing of a primary school during the U.S. and Israeli military strikes on Iran, which is exactly what happened, are simply a violation of humanitarian law. It's a crime, in case you missed that. And it is. But UN, Hamas, or whatever, yeah, we'll just ignore it. Doesn't matter. This is why I often point to and use the counterbalance of something they might listen to, like a Grok or whatever else. Because you can give them source material. I don't blindly trust any of it, Grok or United Nations, but it does matter. And yet they go, that's this or that. That's what they said. I'm supposed to belong. UN, yeah, UN woke, UN democracy, whatever it is. And the point is, it still matters. Question it all, it still matters. And the truth is obvious. Update from CENTCOM commander on Operation Epic Fury. David Camp writes, many of you may remember the shock and awe of strikes of 2003, start of Iraq, the invasion of Iraq. This is the guy telling you, the military. The first 24 hours, he says, of this operation were nearly double the scale of shock and awe. So the illegal Iraq war, right? The shock and awe campaign that we saw, that was all, everyone loved it. It was amazing. All these civilians were dying on live screen TV. They've done nearly double that in Iran. Bombing very clearly civilian targets, as we'll show you, as they're all bragging about, right in the center of Tehran. This is Tehran, guys. A massive civilian location. And you got Haggerty out there going, oh, look how great it is. Sal the agorist, somebody with integrity, says, remember 2 weeks ago when Trump regime feigned sympathy for the Iranian people that were fighting for the Iranians, right? Well, here they are, indiscriminately bombing, which is a war crime, one of the most densely populated places on earth. I just don't know how we can't pretend that's obvious, or we pretend it's not. Sean King says they are just carpet bombing a place that is more dense and crowded than New York City. They aren't even attempting to explain justification. The whole world knows it's not justified, guys. Eric Dowding, apparently happy that one of the deep state pedophiles is on your side now, because that all lines up, right? Yay, Mitch McConnell agrees, because guess what? If you're not a clown like this guy, it's obvious to see that they all always support Israel and war, because they do. I just think it's funny that the moment that these people who you otherwise call monsters are suddenly on your side, you go, yay, unity. How embarrassing. And everyone sees it. Mohammed Safa says from the UN, says the U.S. and Israel just committed a massacre where destroyed a 4-story building full of civilians and then bombed a hotel full of tourists and diplomats. They committed multiple massacres across Lebanon in the middle of the night while people were asleep. The U.S. and Israel both. It never stops. The Telegraph, Tehran, in a quote, an apocalypse of hospitals in flames and children buried beneath rubble. You know, I would have said before, I don't know how they're going to get out of this, but clearly right now they just did it all in Gaza and everyone sees it and nothing has stopped. In fact, they feel enough to do it again. We can't allow this to happen. We can't allow these things to continue. Hospitals in flames. Now, again, I'm not blindly accepting this because the Telegraph says, guys, you can look. If you ever said the same about information in COVID-19, you ever was there, if you just happen to look, if you clearly understand the reality of Israel, if you just look at the facts, it's the same point, guys. It's objective. Same with Renee Good and these other conversations. If you weren't completely blind about partisanship, they were obvious. It's not the same as saying is one versus the other side. All the sides seem to be wrong. It's about acknowledging the truth. Peter Cronow points out that now that it's 9 hospitals, a girls' school, women's basketball gymnasium, Red Crescent building, which has been publicly discussed by most of the Red Crescent, UN, plus the main TV station, residential blocks, just ongoing murder of civilians, because that's apparently the goal, as it has been for Israel from day one. Menjo Sent points out you can't just allow the U.S. to fire ballistic missiles from your bases in your country and then claim you're not directly participating in a regime change war against Iran. That's what's called a belligerent. That's a legal attack. That's why they bombed all of these other countries. She says, so where is the system deployed, as the U.S. is bragging about? Look at our long-range precision system. Clearly not in the United States, right? So that's his point. Well, where are they? Kuwait, Iran, Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia? Well, his point is all the places where Iran, yes, guys, that's the obvious reality. So as they clutch their pearls and act like Iran's doing bad things, well, they're bombing places that are legally allowed. It's not that hard to see, guys. It's all very clear. This was pretty crazy. As Loki points out, here's CNN basically admitting that they're censoring for Israel.
there. We're not showing you that because we're not going to show, the Israeli government does not allow us or want us to show where that may have come up, that interceptor. Showing you that because we're not going to show, the Israeli government does not allow us or want us to show where that may have come up, that interceptor.
Great journalism, right? At what point did you ask permission to show information? That's never the case. You, in a way, as a journalist, you're necessarily adversarial to anything you're covering, any governments. So who cares whether you're going to reveal their secret location? It's about journalism and breaking down the truth. Well, see, what's happening right there is they've decided that their objective to help Israel is more important than the truth. That's self-evident. That's just what they just did right there. And that you maybe agree. Maybe you agree that it's important to hide those things for the interest of the war against Iran. Well, okay. Well, then you're choosing the side rather than the truth. And it's less important for a random person, but they're a journalist. And you're not supposed to take a side, are you? But we all know that's how these places operate. Pisceos points out something I caught as well. Luna came out and said, please join me in prayer tonight for the underground church and thousands of Christians in Iran right now that are braving the storm. We must pray for protection. Well, I don't know whether this person just is, I would get the sense that she just is being told things and has no idea what she's talking about. Or she lies. I think she's been caught lying too. The reality, guys, is there's a major Christian population in Iran. It's not a secret. So what she's trying to do is pretend that it's just like they lied about in Gaza and they all get caught for it, that they're acting like it's a secret underground reality. Or I guess maybe she means some kind of special underground church. Well, the truth, in case you didn't already know, is that there's a lot of Christians. And it's not like, I think it's hundreds of thousands and that it fluctuates. But they're not persecuted in Iran, guys. That's not what's going on. And far less than they are in Israel, in fact. And the reality is that that's always been the case. And in fact, there's a whole lot we can get into in that regard. But what I want to highlight here, as he writes, underground, what about the churches in Iran, above ground, that Israel and America are currently bombing? Do you not care about those, Congresswoman? The point is, these people don't actually care about Christians. Or at least not when they're Iranian. It's really about feigning that to justify your actions, as Israel seems to target Christian populations in every single location it's involved in. If you look at the Middle East and the war on terror, the war of terrorism, the one thing you seem to notice is the Christian populations have been diminished in every one of those countries, but the claim that they're fighting, the groups they're fighting, those have grown. That's pretty clear, actually. They've had reports about how that's happened. So ask yourself, why does it make sense that we're, by efforts of fighting terrorism, diminishing Christian populations? Well, you could argue they're trying to get them out of there. That's not what's happening. That is actually the case when it comes to Gaza, by the way, and you can easily look this up and prove it. But the claim at the time was, you Christians got to get out of Gaza because they're dangerous. And they basically forced and coerced most of them out of there. But then look back and go, they're not even allowed to be there. Yeah, and they literally still are. There's literally still churches in Gaza that go back to the foundation of Christendom. They don't care. They're liars. She doesn't care. She's a liar. And drop site news. So far, by their assessment, it's been 1,097 civilians that have been killed by U.S. and Israeli bombings since the 28th, including 181 children under 10, according to the monitor HRANA. In the past 24 hours, the group recorded 104 attacks across 19 provinces, with strikes hitting military bases, medical centers, and residential areas. 104 attacks across 19 provinces. This is just a war on Iran. All of it, guys. Look at the picture. It's crazy. So the point, no stupid rules of engagement. Pete Hegseth. I don't know why that wasn't a bigger point to everybody. Very clear. Now, what's interesting is even as the next day comes on, he's actually arguing that I'll just show you exactly what he says. Because he says no rules of engagement. That's very specific. Then it became something more like some kind of them. You'll see, I forget the term he used. And this is, again, Eric Dougherty reveals America's not screwing around with BS rules of engagement. These guys are like, they're in junior high. They have no idea what you're talking about. And they're just like, yay, holy crap, he just said we're not messing around with rules of, you mean like the law? Like making sure we don't murder people for no reason? But yeah, rock and roll. Just laugh at these people. They're worthy of ridicule. And he says, this was never about a fair fight. I can't believe they're saying this. They're just basically going, we're bad people. We're going to poke them when they're down. We're going to screw them over. We're going to take what we want because they're bad. But we can't prove that as we commit genocide, but follow us.
We're playing for keeps. Our warfighters have maximum authorities granted personally by the president and yours truly. Our rules of engagement.
Right. Hear that again.
Maximum authorities granted. We're playing for keeps. Our warfighters have maximum authorities granted personally by the president and yours.
Maximum authorities? So that means just just like ICE, apparently. There's nothing guiding them. Go out and do what you want. They're all terrorists and monsters. Kill everybody you can. Like, do you not see where this is going? That's what they're doing. And this is based on an illegal invasion, an illegal act. They're not justified. And on top of that, as we're going to show again, maybe quickly because we're long on the show, it's a religious war, even from the U.S.'s perspective, according to how they're being told in the military. There's now, I think it was 110 reports from multiple entities within the military reporting that they're being told this is for Armageddon. They're fighting God's war for Trump. I mean, it's insane. It's insanity. And people are going, holy, this is insane. And reporting this to people. This is what's guiding their policy. So my point is they initiate an illegal war to invade this country or to bomb this country under false pretexts. And then Israel's out there guiding this in some kind of religious context. And there's no rules of engagement. You're giving them maximum authority to do whatever they want on the ground. Everyone should be upset about this.
We're playing for keeps. Our warfighters have maximum authorities granted personally by the president and yours truly. Our rules of engagement are bold, precise, and designed to unleash American power, not shackle.
There it is. Well, you just said there are no rules of engagement, not because of what, the point is the clip I just played for you yesterday. He said, we're not back down, but there's no rules of engagement. I forget exactly the way he said it. We just talked about yesterday. But he made it very clear that there were none. He said no rules of engagement, which, by the way, is why that Eric guy just said the same thing today. It was yesterday's point. So here's a new clip today where he's now going, they'll be precise. You know why? Because somebody who's not a moron was like, dude, are you crazy? And then he came out and evolves the narrative because or maybe he did that to get people to lash out and then he changed it. It's just to cause chaos. That may be part of the design. Either way, there's no world in which that should have been accepted.
This was never unleash American power, not shackle it. This was never meant to be a fair fight. And it is not a fair fight.
So what does that mean? So you're just admitting that what isn't your argument that ultimately you're worried about them having the upper hand? So what you're saying is we want to have this fight when we know we can win when they're not ready to fight back. Or if that's what you're framing it as. Real powerful of you. That's real honorable. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing about this that lines up other than you claiming bad, evil boogeyman. So it all makes sense. So we're able to do the thing that's morally objectionable. The thing that stretches the boundaries of what we accept for ourselves because they're bad. But guess what? They're not. Not in the way they say they are. So what you're accepting is the moral degradation of everything we ever claimed we were because power.
Punching them while they're down.
Think about it. Again, that was what I said earlier. How are you going to say that?
We are punching them while they're down.
There is zero context I've ever seen that makes that a positive thing. That's an insult. That's weak. That's cowardly. That's what you do when you're cheating. I mean, I just think it's crazy that they're using basically analogy points that suggest they're doing the wrong thing.
Which is exactly how it should be.
Yeah, it should be that we punch them while they're down, right? Isn't that what we've always said? Didn't you get grown up teaching to your children to punch people while they're down, right? That's the powerful thing to do.
Thus far, Operation Epic Fury has delivered twice the air power.
So Rami Abdul from the Euromed Human Rights Group. In the Israeli-U.S. attacks on Iran, almost no one is speaking about the civilian toll. Now, his estimate seems to be much higher, but he does have more direct access to this stuff, and he's claiming, but take it for the grain of salt, like always, he's estimating, the estimates indicate around 2,000 civilians have been killed and 580 children just in 4 days. Now, if you remember the same estimates that were made about Gaza, they wildly surpassed them, even though they were called fake when they first came out. It's the same point here. Question it, right? Wait till we can prove it. But I think it's quite obvious. Look at what we just saw in just Tehran. They bombed 13 provinces and just right now. Guys, it's obvious. U.S. Secretary Pete Hegseth says the war could last up to 8 weeks. Achieve uncontested airspace. Same one before. Mel says, we know that's America's #1 export nowadays, it seems. Oh, the point was, over the country in a week, we've unleashed death and destruction from the sky all day long. Same point. Why is that something you're bragging about? These people are literally trying to drag people down into their sociopathic mindset. Death and destruction has never been what we are promoting. Even if we all secretly kind of know, or some of us know, that's what they really were doing. But now you're just going, we're murdering because we're free and freedom and power and blending all the things together. We're doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. Hooray! So it just doesn't make any sense. And also, you're bombing civilians objectively. You can all see it. So yes, we get it. You've been bombing just death and destruction across all of Iran. Yay! I think this is what Israel wants to hear. Brian Allen points out an alarming extension of this, where it seems, based on the reports, now these images appear to be the wrong images, but even the check down here will tell you that the claim is actually still accurate, which is that a submarine did in fact attack a submarine did attack Iran's IRS Dina, which was the ship, off of Sri Lanka on today. Now, why that's important, as he says, and then there's 101 people missing, apparently, 78 injured. That's in the Indian Ocean. Now, they may not feel relevant to anybody that thinks just bomb Iran everywhere, but that's not the legal reality of war, just like it's not allowed to bomb them when their family's home or when they're just not military. This, as he says, just left the Middle East. China and Russia are already providing Iran satellite intelligence, so we're hearing. U.S. bases destroyed. India is now hosting American fallback ports, and now a submarine strikes in Asian waters. This isn't a regional conflict anymore, guys. It's a world war in slow motion. And I've been saying that forever in the regard to the sense that it's we've always been in that position. That doesn't mean we shouldn't care about it. But those out there always hyping every move as the beginning of World War III have always been using that to keep you in fear. The point is, you can go back to Syria and before. We've always been in some kind of, you could pretend like regional war. Is that not the same damn thing? I mean, really. But now I agree, if you want to even go beyond that, this is all the way around. And they don't care. And this is your limited game. This is the guaranteed peace in 4 weeks. Come on, guys. Israel always gets what it wants, apparently. But here's Scott Jennings out there trying to gaslight everybody. If the last attack on Iran didn't deter the Iran regime, then why would this one be different? Well, because the people who weren't deterred are now dead, he says.
If bombs dropping on the nuclear program and destroying them last year didn't help move forward those objectives of deterring the regime, why do we think that suddenly this is going to do the same thing?
Because the people who weren't deterred are now dead. That's number one.
But this is Iran. Those people are dead, but there are other people. They've got plenty of people, Scott.
I agree with you on that.
Plenty of Ayatollahs. There's no indication. 7 layers deep on we are 72 hours into this.
You're making a good case for this.
There's no indication, as we said.
Did you hear what he just said? You're making a good case for the why? Because first of all, the argument is he literally just made the argument that we killed the ones that might stop this from happening. And then the guy over there goes, well, they're 7 layer deep in that very thing. And he goes, well, you're making my case. How are you making it? That's contradicting your case. What you think he's making the case for is continuing to bomb them, but that contradicts what you said just happened. Like, you guys, you realize they're trapped in this point where everything they say is contradicting what they just said yesterday, because apparently they're going in every direction all at once. Maybe because they don't know what they're doing. Maybe because they are being driven that way. I don't know. But it's every moment you're seeing these kind of embarrassing contradictions. It's always.
Here tonight that there have been any political changes in Iran. So my question is, if bombs dropping a year ago didn't change it, what is the rationale for thinking that bombs dropping today are going to change the actual political dynamics on the ground in Iran?
Well, look, you're asking a broad question about justification and what we intend to do with these guys over the long term. The justification is...
That's not even remotely what she just said, by the way. She asked why you think this would change the situation when last bombing clearly didn't, since you just bombed them again, right? And then, well, you're asking about justifications. Let me explain what we're doing. There's bad politics, actually, but politics.
We had a huge problem with the ballistic missiles, and we did believe that if Israel, according to the Secretary of State, attacked, and they intended to attack, that our bases were going to be targeted. They were not willing to absorb that attack.
Didn't Trump just say that wasn't true? Maybe they should get their story straight. This is within less than 24 hours amongst themselves, guys.
So we attacked. That is what the Secretary of State has said. You can agree with it, disagree with it, but that is the justification. That's number one. Number two,
you think that makes sense? You think?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that the Iranians are not shy about firing ballistic missiles across the region.
What are we talking about? Yeah, now that you've bombed them and they've responded, it's only ever been in response to your actions. In every the last time, the time before, what are we talking about? He knows that. That's a desperate position in any context, whether you're debating, it doesn't matter. You're basically lying and everyone knows you're lying. That's the most desperate, weak position in the table. And for crying out loud, you're sitting with a bunch of people from CNN. That's pretty embarrassing.
You think that's a good reason to go to war?
Many of them in the
But where
sky
do you
above
stand,
my head.
Scott? Are you for this invasion or not? You seem to be dancing around the question.
No,
you think this was a good idea?
No, I'm quite for it.
And
I think these butchers deserve to die, not just because.
That's always where it goes. It just realize we've gone way away from the actual question, and this is what they do on purpose. Because they're bad and they deserve to die. Well, that's something that's usually handled in courts of law, right? Right, Scott? Constitution and law. It's just these guys are so ridiculous. Like on their face, openly. The real point, no integrity. Nothing guiding there are no principles. They will lie through their teeth every day because in these days, apparently every other day because Trump changes his mind. And they all follow along. Now, don't forget, as I commented underneath him, well, that's not what the CIA assessment said from your own government. So he knows he's lying. The center, or at least that their intelligence suggested that would not be the case. And here we are, where they just continue. And I don't think they're even close, to doing what they claim they're doing. Classified intelligence assessments produced by the CIA in recent weeks determined that Khomeini's demise would lean to hardliners from the country's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps or another faction in the country taking power. That's what they told them. That's what Trump's administration, his intelligence, through Gabbard, told him. And the reality is they don't care. In fact, I think that's what Israel's trying to create. The very thing they always said was there that wasn't actually there. So they can then justify doing it forever. It's the same thing they do with Hamas. This is from the Wall Street Journal. And let's not forget, Gantz, as I showed you that on the second, came out, or was it the first? Or that was the third then, because I don't think I did a show on the second. He came out and said that he will not rule out U.S. or Israeli boots in the ground. As I said then, great for the Israeli entity to tell us that he's in charge of ruling out or deciding, or the fact that he's willing to say that he won't rule out U.S. boots, it speaks volumes, and it does. And it's always been there. And I want to point this out as a meme, but in reality, because you may be offended by this. For the podcast, it shows in the bottom, American flag draped coffins. This is Americans. Top picture shows Israelis, and it shows them sitting in long lounge chairs at the beach. Now, look, there's been an Israeli that got killed because of the bombing there. But what we're talking about here is not the exchange of missiles. What I'm talking about is where this seems to be going. And if this goes to Iraq or Syria or any of the rest of them, that we're for Israel, as we can see Israel dominating Syria right now. So the United States can go to all this and waste American lives, and then Israel swings in and takes control. That's literally what's happening. Trump can pretend he put that terrorist there, which why he would ever admit that is beyond me. But we know Israel's made bases. They're occupying. They're doing what they want. You can prove it. The U.S. doesn't seem to be pushing back on anything. So if this goes that direction, what do you think is going to happen? Well, we already got told. Well, we won't count out U.S. boots on the ground. Do you think that Israeli troops are going to deploy to Iran? Did they deploy to Iraq? They deploy to Syria? They deploy anywhere other than Gaza and still fail? Not that I can tell. That's how this is going to go. And all these people screaming about protecting Israel will fail to acknowledge that they're not the ones fighting the war that apparently is for protecting them. As Wyatt Reed points out, this is gigantic, by the way, and you can verify this every which way you want. This is a huge gathering of Iranians. As he says, starting to think the media was lying when they told us Iranians were waiting to lay flowers at the feet of the invaders. Sort of like they lied when it happened in Iraq. Trump, sitting around discussing the worst case if someone is bad takes over Iran. And it's always the same thing every time, just like Venezuela. Now, I was going to start with that today about Delcy Rodriguez and the weird thing from Trump, where he's basically threatening legal action if she doesn't just do whatever he wants. Like that's somehow legal. It's just so wild. It's sort of like him threatening suits and everything to get people to do what he wants in this country and acting like it's somehow legitimate. The point is, as Alex writes, Trump wants to bring democracy to Iran by choosing its leader. When political elites use the word democracy, what they really want to say is we get to choose who runs the country. It's like Hamas or anything else, or rather Gaza. They go democracy, and then they give you the Shah. That's what they're doing in Iran. The crown prince of democracy. They're laughing at us, guys. That's what's happening. And that's what they're discussing. So if it's someone they don't like, well, then they're going to say no. Well, then that's not democracy. We all know that. We're not stupid. Now, lastly, and I think this is important. Well, actually, lastly is the religious part, but this is, and I might just carry that over to tomorrow because we already talked about it, but I think it's really important to see this. Now, it shows in my mind two things. One, the headline reads from Reuters, White House, Spain has agreed to cooperate with U.S. military. And then the same day they come out and say, nope, we don't agree. Or actually, well, excuse me, this one was, so that was the new one. Okay, so earlier, by the way, back on February, they came out and said they reject Israel's accusations of standing with Iran, which is interesting because Trump comes out and says, or through the White House, that Spain says they want to agree. And Spain comes out and says no to war. Sanchez reaffirms Spain's stance against Trump's Iran offensive. So what's going on here? Is this Trump desperately trying? Here's what I think. Just cut to the chase. I think what happened is that they're trying to coerce anybody, to stand up and stand to back them. Because this is universally unpopular because it's obvious what they're doing is wrong and nobody wants to stand up and take that. So I was actually really shocked when I saw this. I'm like, why in the world would anybody stand up and stand by what they can see nobody agrees with and everything's illegal? And I thought, okay, well, they're reporting it. So if it did happen, that means in my mind that Trump or whoever else offered them something that they see as more valuable and more beneficial to them in the long term than whatever the side effects, whatever the consequences would be for doing this. And then I saw the report where they go, that's not true. We didn't agree to that. That's crazy. So I think at that point, maybe he tried to coerce them into going along with it, thought he had the upper hand, and they came out and said no. Or maybe tomorrow they come out and go, well, now we agree. And then I'll argue that they got coerced. But it's all my opinion. But either way, isn't that just interesting that in the same 24-hour period, they can come out, he can tell you they have a deal, they're working together with war, then Spain says, no, we're not. And every part of this conversation is completely like that. This is just from the Washington Post. Spain's Sanchez says no to war in Iran despite Trump's trade threat. Now, this is another part to this where it shows you coercion, where Trump is threatening using tariffs to get them to do. That's my point, though, right? So you could argue, now I can't prove these are interconnected. It's very clear they're at the same time, but it seems to me that Trump was threatening, like he did with tariffs everywhere else, which is simply taxes on you, in order to get Spain to join the war against Iran. They're desperate, guys. Now, that's my opinion, clearly. But either way, he's using these coercively. Everybody can see that. Now, I think I want to go through this more in depth again just because it's important. But just to remember, as the Cradle reports, the U.S. troops commanders are framing Iran's war as the God's plan. That's U.S. personnel. Apparently, 110 complaints have been logged within 48 hours from over 40 units across 30 installations complaining. And this includes Christians, Muslims, Jews, everybody. And they're outraged about this. They're alarmed about this. Why? Because you're being told you're fighting a religious war, not a just war for freedom and liberty, but a religious war. And who's the one guiding that? Is anybody confused about that? And this came through Jonathan Larson's Substack. He's the one that actually broke the story. And there's plenty of examples of the very weird Zionist Christian, whatever they call what they're doing, coming from this administration. Like I said, I'm going to go through this in the next show. But realize that this, you may go, oh, that's just weird. That's Christian. They're good. The Muslims are weird. All that is your perspective. There's radical elements in every religion in the world. And that's based on who goes there. Muslims, Jews, Christians, most of them in this conversation, in my opinion, across the world are just normal people. These people, Zionist people, the Christian extremists in this group or Zionists are all, what we're talking about are clearly driven by this. Yeah, I'll come back to it. Just that clip is, where she's just talking about, what's she saying? Yeah, she's going to strike and strike and strike and strike your enemies and strike your enemies because God said, like, that's insane. That's insanity. The idea that God wants you to murder people around the world because of I mean, come on. Now, look, you could point to things in the Bible that's a different story than them justifying you murdering people for worldly intentions. That's so counter to any Christian value. They don't care. And on top of that, you have plenty of examples of, here's Hegseth proudly discussing the Third Temple conversation, right? The destruction of Al-Aqsa Mosque and the rebuilding of the Third Temple, which is the end times prophecy. Here he is, proudly discussing how that's important, which, by the way, necessarily includes the destruction of the West. That's what they believe, and they're literally calling out America first. Former Margaret Taylor Greene, if your church leaders and elected leaders are telling you that the way to bring Jesus back, because that's what they're saying from the Christian side of this conversation, is by killing innocent children of innocent foreign people you've never met in a foreign land you've never been to, then you're believing the lies of wolves dressed in sheep's clothing. 100% agree. Men of God who say that they agree with what's going on in Gaza are not men of God. I will stand by that until the end of my time. Okay, how can you possibly argue otherwise? Here in English, by the way, because ask why that makes sense, why the IDF would put out a video in English. Well, obviously, because they're propagandizing Americans. That shouldn't be confusing by now. That comes out and says, Purim, triumph over an enemy seeking your destruction. Centuries later, we are reliving that story. Now, what she's claiming here is that they're essentially reliving this through what they're doing in Iran, right? Well, as Harrison points out, and this is easily verifiable, the story of Purim, however you pronounce it, ends with Jews murdering 75,000 people. That's the actual story. Now, of course, the argument is enemies, that they're enemies they took out. So fine, let's just even you pretend that's justified. Now, what she's literally saying is we're reliving this through this, and you're talking about 75,000 people being killed. It's like when they reference Amalek. This is not a secret. What they intend is destruction and chaos and murder. That's what that means. And they're telling you, America. Now, this may be normal to you, right? I mean, I've been in plenty of these myself. I grew up in a place with football and whatever else where, for the podcast, where people pray together, right? Everyone reaches in. This is everyone touching Donald Trump, and they're all praying together. Well, as DG Meme says, Rubio, let me explain to you that Iran is run by lunatics and religious fanatics. So you could argue that's the reality, or you could realize that they're religious people, just like these are religious people. And within those groups, yes, there are very clearly religious extremists, just like there are in this group. That doesn't make everybody that's a Christian or everybody's a Muslim a bad. Like, this is a game, and they're using it. Okay? And the point is, with what Israel's doing, those are religious extremists, guys. That's insane. It's very clear what they're doing, and they're using Trump's administration to do it. That's why this whole thing right here is happening with the Turning Point USA background. But what's happening in in Iran, there's plenty of examples of the similar mindset. Now, the question is, that what is guiding the policy of the government? If you think that, then demonstrate yet again for me where those things are happening in the world. Where is Iran doing those things? I won't even disagree. It's certainly possible. Prove it to me. In this case, well, you can see what they're doing. As Trump and his government tells the military they're fighting a war for God, a war against God's war for Armageddon. This can't be confusing to anybody. There's only one extreme element in that right now, and it's clear. Now, to end, Bataya Ugar Sargon points out the same thing as earlier. 85% of Republicans support the war on Iran. 84 Republicans, Fox News, CBS, 81 Republicans. I think that's objectively false. And as Zachary points out, well, the MAGA apologist, this person he points to, is a propagandist and not a journalist. She claims MAGA supports Trump on Iran. This is false. The data she cites are questionnaires asking U.S. Americans what they think about launching strikes on Iran. Oh, but over the past 4 days, the U.S. did not launch strikes on Iran, as the questionnaire asks. That's what we did last June. The point is, if you read into this, the reality is quite different about what's happening. And what you can see in the conversation is that Americans have very clearly called this out. Turning Point USA individuals have almost roundly called this out. I mean, they're desperate, and that's why this stuff continues to happen. I'll leave you with a clip. Another one from Donald Trump, swearing to commit to stop the globalist ambition of regime change wars in the Middle East. Yet again, showing you why this is yet again the globalist agenda that they're all trying to hide from. But guys, call it out every single day. Call it out. Now, in regard to the show tomorrow, because of a couple of factors, I'm going to try to do one, but it's not guaranteed. Just want to put that out there for everybody planning, because I'm on my path right now with consistent shows. I'll be doing them right after that, and might only even take one day this week. I'm not sure, but just stay at it, because you guys look at what's happening. You're winning if you don't see that by now, and I mean in the sense of at least information flow, because I mean you may not agree that everybody sees it or the majority. Maybe I'm wrong. But you must acknowledge that this is different than it was 10 years ago or whatever. It's very different, that our conversations are basically guiding the conversation, like as the independent media. Even the mainstream alternative seems to be responding to the actual journalism and trying to flare out and flail and get you distracted. You're having that effect. Carry that with you every day, man. You're making a difference out there. Well, thank you for tuning in. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
These globalists want to squander all of America's strength, blood, and treasure, chasing monsters and phantoms overseas. In addition, there must also be a complete commitment to dismantling the entire globalist neocon establishment that is perpetually dragging us into endless wars, pretending to fight for freedom and democracy abroad.
We should have never gone into the Middle East. We should have never gone into the Middle East. Under my leadership, we will turn the page forever on those foolish, stupid days of never-ending wars. We're rebuilding our military stronger than ever before, and we are not going to deplete it again on stupid, senseless, endless wars. World War III has never been closer than it is right now. We need to clean house of all of the warmongers and America last globalists and the deep state. I am the president who delivers peace. I was the first president in decades who didn't start a war. And the worst, most incompetent, most corrupt president in history is going to drag us into World War III. And this horrible, horrible president is dragging us toward World War III. We're going to be in World War III soon. Because I think we would have been good with Iran. I don't want to do anything bad to Iran. Large sections of the Middle East. I mean, look at the death and destruction that's taken place. And none of this would have happened if I were president. Our opponents join with warmongers and neocons to wage endless wars, these wars that never end. Together we're fighting to secure our borders, end the endless foreign wars, and defend the working people of America. But the Muslim and Arab voters in Michigan and across the country want a stop to the endless wars and a return to peace in the Middle East. That's all they want. Speaking of World War III, I'll keep you out of World War III. What would happen if we had a war? We won't, with me, but you will have World War III, I believe, without me, but we won't have. I will be sure that World War III will not happen. I'm the only one can say it won't happen. But I stand here today, and I'm the only candidate who can make this promise. I will prevent, and very easily, World War III, very easily.